The first thing he felt was the cold. Not the cold of winter or night, the cold of stone against his cheek. The stone floor pressed against his cheekbone and smelled of incense and old wax. The body felt foreign, light, thin. His ribs jutted out from under his skin like those of a stray dog that hadn't been fed in a week. His hands were small, childlike. He tried to clench his fist, and his fingers obeyed, but with a delay, as if the signal were traveling not through nerves, but along a wet rope. Somewhere above, a man was screaming. His voice was high-pitched and brittle with fear. Artem couldn't see who was screaming because his eyes hadn't yet adjusted to the light. But he made out the words: necromancer, filth, guardians. These three words echoed over and over like the tolling of a bell. He forced himself to blink. Once. Twice. On the third blink, the world coalesced from blurry spots into a clear image. A white ceiling with stone ribs. Stained glass windows in narrow openings. A temple. He was lying on the temple floor. Standing over him was a man in a white robe with a sun embroidered on his chest. A priest. The priest's face was gray. His eyes darted about. In his hands he held something small and black. A crystal. An ordinary faceted crystal the size of a walnut. Only it didn't glow white or blue or green like the ones the neighborhood kids had. It was black. So black that it seemed as if there were a hole in the air in the priest's hands. The priest opened his fingers. The crystal fell to the floor and rolled toward the wall. The sound was high-pitched and ringing, as if a coin had fallen. Artem stared at the crystal and didn't understand a thing. The last thing he remembered was the road, night, black ice, his hands on the steering wheel, a heaviness in his shoulders after 4 hours of working with the foal that had been sucked into the combine harvester. He'd pieced it back together bit by bit, sutured the tendons, applied splints. The foal had survived. Artem got into his car and drove home, and then his eyes closed, and that was it. And now here he was, on a stone floor, in a stranger's body, in a temple, with a screaming priest overhead. He was 34 years old. He's a veterinary intensive care specialist. For 20 years, he's worked with bodies that can't say where it hurts. And right now, someone is shouting that he's a necromancer, whatever that means. Someone grabbed his hand. The hand was small, hot, wet with tears. He turned his head. A little girl, about 7 years old, skinny. Her dark hair was matted with sweat. Her eyes were huge. She wasn't screaming or calling for help. She was just holding his hand and looking at him the way animals look when they know something bad is about to happen but don't know how to run away. From somewhere deep within a stranger's memory, a name surfaced. Leah, the orphanage, the youngest, the one who follows him around like a shadow, the one who isn't afraid of the dark, the one who gets beaten for being strange. He didn't know this child, but his body knew. His hands knew, and in that moment, that was more important than anything else. 2 guards were walking down the temple aisle. Chainmail, short swords, boring faces. For them, it was routine. Black crystal, necromancer, take her away, burn her. It was simple. Artem stood up. His knees were shaking. His body felt weak and light. An undernourished teenager, an apprentice. His hands remembered the knife and the hard labor, the slaughterhouse. He didn't run. He looked at the priest. The priest recoiled. Artem bowed, slowly, calmly, the way one bows when leaving the boss's office. And he said he apologized for the disturbance. The voice was unfamiliar, boyish, breakable, but the words came out so evenly that the priest froze mid-sentence. The guards exchanged glances. Necromancers don't bow. Necromancers don't ask for forgiveness. Necromancers scream and hurl black fire and howl like beasts. So says the church. So it is written in the books. And this boy is standing there, bowing. Artem took Leah by the hand and headed for the side exit. Not toward the main doors where the crowd was gathered. Toward small door behind the column that led into the courtyard. His body remembered this church. His body had been here before. Muscle memory worked better than his conscious mind. The guards set off after them, but not quickly. They were still arguing over who would go first. Artem pushed the door open with his shoulder. The courtyard, the fence, the gate. Beyond the gate, an alley. Beyond the alley, a street. Beyond the street, the outskirts. Beyond the outskirts, the forest. He wasn't running. He was walking quickly, but he wasn't running. Runners get caught. Those who walk are watched as they go. Leah scurried along beside him and asked no questions. She just held onto his hand. An hour later, they left the city walls behind. The guards at the gate didn't stop them. 2 ragged kids, a boy and a girl. Who would care about them? 2 hours later, the city of Einhall was behind them. Gray bottoms, the white tower of the cathedral, smoke from the chimneys. It all grew smaller with every step and turned into a speck on the horizon. 3 hours later, they were in the forest. Leah collapsed. She simply sat down on the ground and didn't get up. Her legs were tired. She was small and hungry and scared, and she had no strength left. Artem sat down beside her. He leaned against a tree. He closed his eyes, and he began to think. So, a body that wasn't his own. 15 years old. A strange world. Magic exists. He's a necromancer. They'll come for him. A child is nearby. No food, no money, no weapons. Everything's bad, but he's alive, and Leah is alive. That's already more than he had 5 minutes ago. He opened his eyes and saw a dog. It was lying at the roots of an old oak tree. Gray, large, a hunting breed. Dead, long dead. Maybe a week, maybe 2. The body hadn't fully decomposed yet. The cold weather had preserved it. Artem stood up and walked over. He knelt down. He placed his hand on its side. Cold, hard. The fur was coarse. His fingers instinctively traced its ribs. A fracture. No, not a fracture. A malunited fracture in its hind leg. An old one, from when it was still alive. This dog had been limping. Maybe a year, maybe 2. The bone had healed crookedly and was pressing on the joint. Every step caused pain. No one had fixed it. No one had noticed. Or maybe they had noticed and decided it wasn't worth the trouble. Artem knew this type of injury. He'd seen it in cows and horses dozens of times. A malunited fracture. It needed to be broken again. Set correctly. Immobilized. Allowed to heal. Standard procedure. He pulled a knife from his pocket. His body remembered the knife. A slaughterhouse apprentice's knife. It was short and blunt, but it would do for bones. He found the line of the old fracture. He tested the angle and broke it, exactly along the line, cleanly. Then he took 2 straight branches. He whittled them down. He set them against the paw. He secured them with a strip of cloth torn from his shirt. A splint. Simple. Reliable. The paw stood straight. Now it was right. He placed both palms on the dog's cold side. He closed his eyes. And he felt it. It was like a current. Not electric, something else. Dark, warm, coming not from the outside, but from within. From that place in the chest where normal people's hearts beat. His was beating too, but next to his heart was something else. Something black and thick as oil. It flowed down his arms, through his palms, into the dead body. He wasn't pulling anyone's soul out. He wasn't calling the dead dog back. He was simply setting the mechanism in motion. Like restarting a heart that had stopped. Like rebooting a system. The body, the bones, the muscles, the tendons, the nervous tissue. All of it was there. All of it was intact. Just turned off. He turned it on. The dog twitched. Its paws tensed. Its tail twitched. Its eyes opened. Cloudy, empty, without that spark that distinguishes the living from the dead. But the muscles were working. The heart wasn't beating, but the blood was flowing. The lungs weren't, but the body stood. The dog stood on all 4 paws. On 4 even paws. For the first time in years. Without a limp. Without pain. Without that crooked, clumsy gait she'd had when she was alive. Leah stopped crying. She looked at the dog. The dog looked at Leah and wagged its tail. Slowly, hesitantly, like a puppy just learning. Leah reached out her hand. The dog nudged her palm with its nose. A cold nose, but it nudged it. Artem sat on the ground next to the dead dog that was wagging its tail at the living girl. And for the first time since waking up in the temple, he felt something resembling solid ground beneath his feet. He didn't understand this world. He didn't know the rules. He didn't fully know the language. But he understood bodies. He understood bones, muscles, and joints. He understood what it meant to fix what was broken. And if, in this world, his gift was to raise the dead, then that wasn't a curse. It was his job. It's just that the patients were colder. He looked at the dog, then at Leah, then back at the dog. And he said aloud, quietly and calmly, "Here's our first patient." Leah asked what her name was. Artem thought for a moment. Her fur was gray with dark patches. Her nose was black. Her ears were black. He said her name was Ugalak. Leah smiled for the first time that day. Ugalak wagged her tail again. They spent the night under an oak tree. Leah slept pressed against the dog's side. Ugalak wasn't breathing and didn't give off any warmth, but that didn't bother Leah. It wasn't the warmth that mattered to her, but the presence. Artem didn't sleep. He sat there thinking. He needed shelter, food, information. He needed to figure out where he was and what the rules were here. He needed to figure out what he was capable of and where his limits lay. He needed to protect the girl sleeping next to the dead dog, smiling in her sleep. He looked at his hands, small, skinny, calloused from the knife, the hands of a teenager. But behind those hands lay 20 years of experience, 20 years of working with bodies that couldn't say where it hurts. He'd been dealing with this his whole life. He'd handle it here too. In the morning, they'd move on, north, further away from the city, further away from the guards and the priests and the crystals and everything that wanted to kill him. He'd find a place. He'd build a shelter. He'll figure it out. He's always figured things out. Dawn came quietly. Gray light filtered through the tree branches. Leah was asleep. Ugolka lay nearby with her eyes open. The dead don't sleep. Artem got up. He cracked his neck. His body ached, a teenager's body, malnourished and worn out from hard labor. But it was alive, and it was his. He touched Leah on the shoulder. She opened her eyes. She looked at him, then at Ugolkak, and she stood up on her own. Without words, without complaints, they headed north. For 3 days they walked through the forest. Artem led Leah along animal trails, far from the roads. Roads mean people. People mean questions. Questions mean guards. Kiran's body didn't know the forest well. The boy had grown up in a city slaughterhouse, not in the woods. But Artem knew the forest in his own way. 20 years of farm work, dirt roads, ravines, streams he had to wade across with a cow that didn't want to go. It was easier here. No cows, no mud, just trees and silence. Leah didn't complain. She walked in silence, holding onto the hem of his shirt. When she got tired, he'd hoist her onto his shoulders. His body was thin and weak, but it held up. Teenagers are tougher than they seem. Ugalak walked ahead. The dead dog never got tired. She didn't want to eat. She didn't want to drink. She just walked at a steady pace and turned her head back from time to time, checking, as if she were counting them. 1, 2, everyone's here. Let's keep going. On the second day, Artem began to notice changes. Ugalak was moving more confidently. In the first few hours after waking up, she'd walked in jerks. She'd placed her paws awkwardly, like a foal that had just stood up. Now her stride had evened out. Her muscles were getting used to the correct position. The paw he'd broken and set back in place was working without a hitch. The splint was still on, but it wasn't needed anymore. The bone was in place. Her body had remembered. That was important. It meant his work was effective, that the laws of biomechanics applied even to dead bodies. The fracture was repaired. The joint had set correctly. The muscles had adjusted. He was a surgeon. Only his patients weren't breathing. On the third day, they reached the river. Wide, cold, with a swift current. They found a ford half a kilometer downstream. The rocks were slippery but large. Artem carried Leah in his arms. The water reached their waists. The cold stung their skin. Kiran's body began to shake. He clenched his teeth and kept going. Ugolka crossed on her own. She was indifferent to the cold. On the other bank, Artem lit the first fire. His hands remembered how. Kiran's body had grown up in a slaughterhouse, and a slaughterhouse always means fire. Ovens for singeing carcasses, braziers for tools. He found dry moss and flint and struck a spark on the third try. Leah sat by the fire, warming her hands. She was hungry. They were both hungry. In 3 days, Artem had found only a handful of berries and a bunch of wild onions. That wasn't enough. He needed food, real food, meat or fish. He looked at the river. There were fish. He'd seen them splashing near the rocks, but he had neither a hook nor a net nor a harpoon, just a knife. A short, blunt apprentice's knife. He looked at Ugolka. The dog was sitting nearby, staring at the water. A hunting breed. In her former life, she'd caught game. Her body remembered. Her muscles remembered. But Ugolka was an empty shell. She didn't remember how to hunt. She was relearning how to walk. Hunting would come later. Artem stood up and waded into the water. The cold hit his legs again. He found a narrow spot between the rocks where the current herded the fish into a pool. He stood motionless. He waited. A fish appeared 10 minutes later, silvery, long, like a trout. He struck with his knife. He missed. He struck again. He hit it. He pulled it ashore. Small, maybe a third of the size of his palm, but it was food. He caught 3 more in half an hour. His hands were shaking from the cold. His fingers had turned blue. But 4 fish lay on the rock. He gutted them with his knife. His hands remembered, butchering carcasses at the slaughterhouse. The principle was the same, only the scale was different. Fish over the coals. Leah ate greedily. She burned herself. She didn't notice. Artem ate slowly. He stared at the fire and thought. He needed a place, not just a shelter for the night, a permanent place, with a roof, with water, with land he could cultivate. He needed hands to work. His own hands were too small and weak for everything that lay ahead, so he needed other hands, dead hands. He thought about it calmly, without fear or revulsion. For 20 years, he'd worked with bodies every day. Cows, horses, goats, sheep, bodies that needed to be opened up, repaired, and put back together. The only difference was that before, after the operation, the patient would wake up and moo. But now the patient gets up and silently goes to work. On the 4th day, they found a road, an old, overgrown road that led into the mountains. The wagon ruts were overgrown with grass. No one had driven here in a long time. Artem set off along it. The road meant there was a settlement somewhere ahead. It had been there and perhaps still stood. 2 hours later, he saw a village, a dozen houses, stone walls, thatched roofs. Half of them had collapsed. The fences were crooked. The well in the center was overgrown with moss. The village was dead. He walked all the way around it. Not a single living soul. No people, no livestock, not even rats. On the walls of one house he found claw marks, deep ones, 3 fingers wide. Not a bear's. What's something else? Something he didn't yet know. In the cemetery behind the village he counted 12 fresh graves. The earth had settled but wasn't overgrown yet. A month, maybe 2. The village had been abandoned. Or they'd died out. Or both. Artem stood in the cemetery and looked at the graves. 12 bodies, 12 potential patients, 12 pairs of hands that could build, plow, and repair roofs. He could feel it. He could feel them beneath the ground. The dark energy in his chest was drawn to them like a magnet to iron. But he wasn't in a hurry. He inspected the houses first. He found one with an intact roof and walls. The stove inside was intact. The bed was broken, but the floor was dry. The windows were intact. The door was still on its hinges. He led Leah inside. He stoked the stove. He found 3 sacks of grain in the cellar. Mice had gotten to 1, but 2 were intact. He found a clay pot of salt, a barrel of sauerkraut. The cabbage was sour and soft, but edible. Leah ate the cabbage without making a face. She ate everything. Children who are starving will eat anything. Artem left her in the house with Ugolok and returned to the cemetery. He stood before the first grave. He placed his palms on the ground, and he felt it. A man. Large, strong bones, big hands. A peasant. He'd worked in the fields his whole life. He died of a fever. The body was intact. Nothing was broken, nothing was rotting. The cold earth had preserved him. Artem dug with his hands, with a knife, with a stick, for 2 hours. The soil was heavy and damp. By the time he reached the body, his fingers were scraped raw. The man lay in a simple wooden coffin. His face was peaceful. His beard was red with gray streaks. On his chest was a wooden symbol of the sun, an amulet of the Church of the One. Artem removed the amulet and set it aside. Then he began his examination. As always, just as he did with every patient. His hands moved down the body from top to bottom. The skull was intact. The neck was fine. The spine was straight. The ribs were intact. The pelvis was in place. The legs, the left knee. Wait, he'd found it. An old knee injury. The meniscus was damaged. While he was alive, this man had walked with pain in his knee every day. He'd gotten used to it. He never complained. Farmers don't complain. They work until they drop. Artem took out his knife. He knew what to do. Just like with Ugolok. First, fix it, then lift him up. He worked on the knee for half an hour. He cleaned out the damaged tissue. He realigned the joint. He stabilized it. Then he placed both palms on the man's chest and closed his eyes. A dark wave flowed from his chest through his hands into the cold body. Slower than with the dog. The body was larger. The mass was greater. It required more energy. Artem felt as if something inside him had gone empty, as if a quarter of the fuel had been drained from the tank. The man opened his eyes, empty, cloudy, expressionless, like a newborn's. Artem helped him sit up. The man sat there, staring straight ahead. He didn't blink, he didn't breathe, but his muscles held his body upright. His spine was working. His balance was working. Artem stood up and held out his hand. The man looked at the hand. For a second. 2 seconds. Then he took it. Artem pulled him up. The man stood up. He swayed. He steadied himself. He stood upright on both feet, without a limp, probably for the first time in 20 years. Artem looked at him. He was large, broad-shouldered, strong even in death. His hands were like shovels. In life, this man had plowed fields and hauled sacks. His body remembered that work. His muscles were attuned to it. He just needed to be taught all over again, like a foal is taught to walk, step by step. Artem told him his name was Yorick. The man didn't answer. Empty bodies don't speak. Not right away. Maybe later. Maybe never. But now he had a name. Artem led Yorick out of the grave and toward the village. The dead peasant walked through the dead village, and his footsteps were the only sound besides the wind. Leah peeked out of the house. She saw Yorick. She looked at Artem. Artem waited. If she got scared, he would explain. If she cried, he would comfort her. If she ran away, he would find her. Leah wasn't scared. She looked at Yorick for a long time, seriously. Then she said his shirt was dirty, and she went back into the house. A minute later, she returned with a rag and began scrubbing the dirt off his sleeve. Yorick stood there watching her. Ugolka came over and sat down beside her. Artem stood there watching the scene. A little girl was cleaning a dead peasant's shirt. A dead dog sat nearby. An abandoned village surrounded them. Silence. And for some reason, it was the most peaceful scene he'd seen in the last 4 days. During his first week in the village, Artem revived 3 more people. The second was a boy of about 17, skinny, tall, crushed by a cart. His rib cage was crushed. Artem spent 4 hours working on him. He set the ribs one by one. 3 were broken so badly that the shards were sticking out inward. He pulled out the shards and replaced them with wooden plates. He carved them from an oak plank. He cut them to size. He tied them in place with a wire he found in the barn. It was rough, but it worked. The rib cage held its shape. Lungs aren't necessary. The dead don't breathe. But the ribs protect the internal organs and keep the torso upright. Without ribs, the body collapses like a sack. He named it Pasha. The third was an old woman. She'd frozen to death. Her body was almost intact. The cold had preserved it better than any embalming. Artem found only one problem. Her right shoulder joint was dislocated, a dislocation that no one had set. She'd lived with it for maybe a year, maybe 2, with just one arm. Artem set the joint in a minute, a familiar procedure. The same thing happens with cows. Pinch, pull, a click, done. The old woman stood up. She raised her right arm, lowered it, raised it again. She could do that now. For the first time in a long time. He named her Martha. The fourth was a fisherman. He drowned. His body was pulled from the river and buried while still wet. The water had soaked through the tissues but hadn't destroyed them. Artem examined him for a long time. He found something interesting. The fisherman had an anomaly in the structure of his lungs. Even in death, his lungs retained their shape. They were larger than usual, more voluminous, maybe because he'd been diving his whole life. Maybe genetics. Artem made a mental note of this. Everybody taught him something new. Every patient was a challenge. Every challenge was an experience. He named the fisherman Grill. Now he had 5 charges, counting Ugolka. 5 pairs of hands, or rather 4 pairs of hands and 4 paws. That wasn't enough for what he had in mind, but it was enough to get started. First, he repaired the roofs. Yorick hauled logs. His body remembered hard labor, and his muscles kicked in quickly. 2 days later, Yorick was lifting a log that Artem couldn't budge. The dead don't get tired. The dead feel no pain. The dead don't stop for lunch. Yorick worked 16 hours a day. No breaks, no complaints. Pasha worked on the roof. His long arms and light frame made him ideal for working at heights. He was learning to climb. On the first day, he fell. On the second day, he fell less often. On the third day, he didn't fall once. His muscle memory was being built from scratch, but it was developing quickly. No old habits to break. A clean body, a clean skill. Like a puppy learning to walk, only faster. Marta worked inside the house. Artem showed her how to sweep. Just once. She watched. Then she picked up the broom. The first sweep was crooked, the second was straighter, the 10th was perfect. An hour later, Marta was sweeping as if she'd been doing it her whole life. Or maybe she had. Muscles remember even when the mind is blank. Grill worked with water. Artem sent him to clean the well. A fisherman who'd spent his whole life in the water. A body built for this work. Hands built for this work. Grill dived into the well and scooped out the silt and debris. He didn't need air. He could stay at the bottom for as long as he wanted. After 3 days, the well yielded clean water. Artem drank and couldn't stop. Clean, cold water. The first in a week. Leah drank beside him. Ugalak sat by the well and kept watch. She was always on guard. A hunting dog. That's what she was built for. Artem didn't ask her to. She started on her own. She patrolled the village in a circle. In the morning, in the afternoon, at night, without stopping. If something moved at the edge of the forest, Ugalak would turn her head and look. She didn't bark. Dead dogs don't bark. But she stared so intently that even Artem felt uneasy. In the second week, Artem began working the land. There was a field behind the village. Not very big, maybe 2 hectares. It was overgrown, but the soil beneath the weeds was good. Black soil. He knew black soil. 20 years near Voronezh. Black soil is gold for a farmer. He sent Yorick and Grill to clear the field. Pasha was building a fence around it. Marta carried water. Artem was in charge. He stood in the middle of the field and showed them where to dig, how deep, which roots to pull out, and which to leave. He wasn't an agronomist, but he was a veterinarian from an agricultural region. He knew the land, not as a scientist, but as a man who had grown up alongside it. Grain from the cellar was used for sowing, 2 sacks. Artem didn't know what kind of crop it was. It looked like rye, or a local variety of rye. It didn't matter. They sowed it. They watered it. Now they had to wait. Leah helped. She carried the seeds in the hem of her shirt and scattered them into the furrows that Yorick plowed with a wooden plow. Artem had built the plow himself from a plank and a stick. It was crude and crooked, but it broke up the soil. Yorick pulled it like an ox, tirelessly, without slowing down. In the evenings, Artem sat by the stove and thought. He started keeping records. He found scraps of paper and a charcoal pencil in one of the houses. He wrote everything down. Every body, every injury, every repair. Yorick, a man, about 50 years old, tall, knee repaired, high work capacity, average learning speed, specialization, heavy physical labor. Marta, woman, about 60, average height, shoulder repaired, average work capacity, high learning speed, specialization, household work, and so on for each one, just like patient charts at a clinic. Only, instead of temperature and blood pressure, he recorded joint mobility and the speed of learning new movements. In the third week, what he had been waiting for and fearing happened. Leah fell ill. The cough started at night, dry and frequent. By morning, her temperature had risen. Artem placed his palm on her forehead and felt the heat. He was a veterinarian, not a pediatrician, but he knew the basics. An infection, most likely a cold. Cold water from the river, nights spent on the ground, poor nutrition. Her body had weakened and given in. She needed medicine. He had no medicine. He searched every house. He found bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. He didn't know what they were. He didn't know the dosage. He didn't know what would heal her and what would harm her. Local medicine was as foreign to him as an alien language. He did what he could. Warm drinks, hot stones wrapped in a rag at her feet, cabbage brine, broth made from a fish he'd caught, rest, warmth, and hope. Leah lay on the bed, coughing. Ugolka lay beside her. Marta stood by the door and watched. The dead don't understand illness, but Marta stood there and watched, as if she were keeping watch, as if she were waiting for the moment when she'd need to do something. On the second day of her illness, Leah's condition worsened. Her fever spiked. She was delirious. She was calling out for someone. Not Artem, not Kiran. Some name he didn't know. Maybe someone from the orphanage. Maybe the one who'd beaten her. Sick children call out to those they know, even those who've caused them pain. Artem sat beside her, changing the cloth on her forehead. Every 10 minutes. A wet cloth, cold water, the simplest remedy, the only one available. He hadn't slept for 2 days. On the third day, her fever broke. Leah opened her eyes and asked for something to eat. Artem gave her some broth. She drank half the bowl and fell asleep. A normal, healthy sleep. He left the house and sat down on the ground against the wall. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, from the fear he hadn't allowed himself to feel while she was sick. He had almost lost her, a 7-year-old girl, the only living person close to him, and there was nothing he could do except use a wet rag and give her broth. He needed a healer, a real healer, someone who knew the local illnesses and local herbs, someone who knew how to heal the living, because Artem knew how to fix the dead. And the living break in a different way. A week after falling ill, Leah had fully recovered. She was running around the village again and talking to skeletons. She gave Marta an old bonnet she'd found in one of the houses. Marta put it on. The bonnet sat crooked. Leah adjusted it. Now Marta walked around in the bonnet and looked like someone's grandmother who'd gone out into the yard to fetch water, if you didn't look at her empty eyes. Artem stood at the edge of the village and looked north. There were mountains there, the foothills, higher up and farther away from people. Safer. But here was land. Here were homes. Here was a well with clean water and a field of crops. He decided to stay. This village would become their home. He didn't yet know what it had been called before. A sign hung on the gate, but the letters had worn away. He named it Quiet Valley, because it was quiet here, and because the valley around it was green and peaceful. Tikki Dole, a village where the dead work and the living sleep peacefully. For now. The first month in Tikki Dole ended with Artem realizing one simple thing. He couldn't manage on his own. His 5 charges worked non-stop. The field was sown, the roofs were repaired, the well was clean. But that wasn't enough. The fence around the village had rotted away. The road was overgrown. The stoves in half the houses were cracked. The cellars were flooded with groundwater. Every day a new task arose, and every day there weren't enough hands. Artem returned to the cemetery. There were 7 graves left that he hadn't yet opened. He decided to open 2 more. He couldn't do more than that for now. Each exhumation drained his energy, that very same dark wave rising from his chest. After Grill, he'd walked around like a drunk for 2 days. His legs wouldn't hold him up. His head was spinning. Kieran's body was young and thin, and his energy reserves were limited. The 5th was an old man, very ancient. His bones were thin like a bird's. His hands were small. But his skull was interesting. Artem held it in his hands and felt something. Channels. Thin, invisible channels inside the skull's bones, like the beds of dried-up rivers. He didn't understand what they were, but he remembered. He named the old man Raven. The 6th was a middle-aged woman, sturdy, broad-shouldered, calluses on her hands from an axe, a lumberjack or a carpenter, a body perfect for hard labor. The only problem, 3 fingers on her right hand were broken and had fused into a lump. Artem separated the fingers one by one. He broke them apart again, set them back in place, tied them to straight sticks. Now the hand worked perfectly. 5 fingers, all in place, all flexible. He named her Helga. Now there were 7 of them, 7 charges, himself and Leah. 9 beings in the village, 6 dead, 2 alive, and 1 dead dog. Artem began to organize a system. Each ward was assigned a job. Yorick and Helga did the heavy labor, logs, stones, construction. Pasha worked at heights, roofs, trees, anything that required climbing. The grill by the water, the well, the river, fish, watering the crops. Marta was in the house, cooking, cleaning, laundry. Voron wasn't good for anything yet. An old, frail body, thin arms. Artem wondered what to do with him. For now, he kept him around. He watched him. Ugolka patrolled, around the clock, without sleep, without stopping. A dead dog on eternal duty. The system worked, roughly, slowly, but it worked. Quiet Dole began to come to life. A strange word for a village inhabited by the dead, but it fit. The houses stood straight. The paths were cleared. Clean water flowed from the well. The first shoots were turning green in the field. Leah ran among her charges and talked to them. They didn't answer. Empty bodies don't speak, but they turned their heads when she approached. They looked at her, and she spoke to them the way one speaks to cats, not expecting an answer, simply because she wanted to. Toward the end of the 5th week, Artem sat by the stove and worked on his notes. He drew diagrams of the bodies, rough but clear to him. Yorick's skeleton with a marked knee. Pasha's skeleton with wooden ribs. Marta's skeleton with a set shoulder. He was studying the patterns. The bodies he repaired before lifting them moved better than those he lifted as is. Grill, whom he'd lifted without major repairs, walked a bit unevenly. His left leg lagged behind. Artem double-checked. He found an old ankle dislocation. Minor, imperceptible, but enough to throw off its gait. He placed Grill on the table and reset the joint in an hour. Grill stood up and walked steadily. The first step was wobbly, the second was steadier. The 10th was perfect. Artem made a note of it. Conclusion number 1. The better the body is repaired, the better it functions after recovery. It makes sense, just like with a car. If you change the oil and spark plugs before starting it, it'll run better than if you just turn the key. Conclusion number 2. Bodies learn. Every day they get faster than the day before. On the first day, Yorick couldn't lift the log without dropping it. On the 10th day, he lifted it and carried it 100 meters without wavering. His muscle memory was developing, free of old habits that get in the way. A clean slate. Pure motor skills. Conclusion number 3. Care matters. He noticed it by chance. Leah sewed Yorick's torn sleeve back on. The next day, Yorick moved with greater precision. Artem decided it was a coincidence. Then Leah put a bonnet on Marta. Marta began sweeping faster. Then Leah brought Pasha a new shirt from a chest she'd found in one of the houses. Pasha began climbing the roofs with greater confidence. 3 coincidences. That's no longer a coincidence. It's a pattern. Care strengthens the body. He didn't understand the mechanism. Maybe it was energetic, maybe magical, maybe psychological, though empty bodies have no psyche. But the fact remained a fact. The more attention he paid to his charges, the stronger and more agile they became. Artem began to set aside time for this on purpose. Every evening he went around to check on everyone. He checked their joints, he tightened their fastenings, he cleaned their clothes, he talked to them. They didn't answer, but they listened. He could see it. They turned their heads toward his voice. They froze when he spoke, like animals listening to their master. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone. In the 6th week, a person came to the village. A living one. Artem was the first to see her, from the roof of the house where he was repairing the chimney. A figure on the road, alone, with a bag on her back, walking slowly, limping. A woman. Artem climbed down and walked toward the gate. Yugolka was already there. She was standing and looking at the road. She didn't move. The woman came closer. Young, about 25, thin, her face weather-beaten. Travel clothes, patch upon patch, a leather tool bag on her belt. She stopped at the gate and looked at Yugolok, then at Artem, then back at Yugolok. She said that the dog was dead. She didn't ask. She stated it, as if stating a fact. Artem replied that she was right. The woman looked at the village behind his back, at Yorick, who was dragging a log, at Pasha on the roof, at Martha, who was sweeping the yard in a bonnet. She was silent for a long time. Then she asked if he was a necromancer. Artem said that some people thought so. The woman said her name was Myrna Hurst, that she was a healer, that the church had declared her a heretic for treating peasants for less than was permitted, that she'd been walking for 3 weeks now and didn't know where she was going, that she had herbs and tools in her bag and nothing else, and that she'd seen many strange things in her life, but she'd never seen a skeleton of an old woman in a bonnet before. After that, she fainted. Artem caught her. He called for Yorick. Together they carried her into the house. He laid her on the bed. He checked her pulse. Steady. He checked her pupils. Normal. He checked her hands. Calluses from a knife and a pestle. The hands of a healer. Hands that heal the living. Exactly what he needed. He covered her with a blanket. He placed a mug of water next to her. He told Marta to stand by the door and watch. If she woke up, to give her some water. Marta nodded. Artem froze. Marta nodded. Her first meaningful gesture. Her first response. In 6 weeks. He looked at Marta. Marta was standing by the door, watching the sleeping woman. A bonnet on her head, a broom in her hands, empty eyes. But she nodded. She understood. Artem left the house and sat down on the porch. 2 events in a single day. A living person had come to them on her own, and a dead body had responded to words for the first time. He didn't know which of them was more important. In the morning, Myrna woke up. She drank some water. She got up. She went out onto the porch. She saw Artem sitting by the well, rebandaging Grilia's wrist. She watched for a long time. Then she asked what he was doing. Artem replied that he was fixing the patient. Myrna asked, "But he's dead. Why fix him?" Artem said, "Dead people break down too." Myrna was silent for a minute. Then she sat down next to him. She took her tools out of her bag, a lancet, tweezers, a set of needles, bundles of herbs, and jars of ointments. She laid them out on a rock. She looked at Artem and said she'd stay, if they gave her a room with a stove and didn't force her to talk to skeletons at breakfast. Artem Yom replied that there was a room, and the skeletons were silent at breakfast. Myrna almost smiled. Almost. Myrna changed everything. Not all at once, gradually, just as a warm wind changes the weather. At first, it was imperceptible. Then, suddenly, everything was different. The first week, she kept her distance from those in her care. She gave them a wide berth. She didn't look into their empty eyes. She ate in her room. She only came out when Artem called her. But Artem called her often. Because Leah was coughing again. Not as badly as the first time, a mild cough, a dry one. But Artem remembered those 3 days with the wet rag in the broth, and he wasn't about to take any chances. Myrna examined Leah in 3 minutes. She listened to her breathing by pressing her ear against her back. She looked at her throat. She looked her lymph nodes. She took a bundle of dried herbs out of her bag. She steeped them in hot water. She gave it to her to drink. By evening, the cough was gone. Artem watched this and felt something inside him ease. The knot he'd been carrying in his chest since the first day of Leah's illness. A knot of fear and helplessness. Myrna untied it with a single bundle of herbs. He asked what kind of herb it was. Myrna said it was mountain mint with white root, a standard remedy for colds. Any village healer knows it. Artem replied that he wasn't a healer, he was a veterinarian. Myrna looked at him for a long time. Then she asked what a veterinarian was. Artem thought for a second and said it was a healer for animals. Myrna smiled and replied that that explained a lot. In the second week, Myrna started working, for real. She went around to all the houses. She checked the herb supplies. She found that half of them were poisonous and a quarter were useless. She sorted the remaining poisons she sorted and stored in a room, which quickly turned into a pharmacy. Shelves lined with jars, bundles of herbs hanging from ropes under the ceiling. The smell was bitter, dry, and alive. Artem helped her. He didn't know the local plants, but he knew pharmacology. Not human pharmacology, but veterinary pharmacology. But the principles were the same: active ingredient, dosage, side effects, compatibility. Myrna explained the properties of each herb. Artem asked questions. She was surprised by his questions. She said that no one had ever asked her why mountain mint reduces inflammation. People just drank it and either got better or didn't. But this boy was asking about the mechanism of action. Artem couldn't explain to her where he'd learned these words. He said he'd read a lot. Myrna didn't believe him, but she didn't argue. They worked side by side. He mended the dead, she healed the living. For now, the only living person was Leah, but Artem knew that would change. Rumors were spreading. People are coming. In the third week, Myrna spoke to one of her charges for the first time. It happened in the morning. She went out to fetch water and ran into Marta at the well. Marta was standing there with buckets, 2 of them, full. She was carrying the water into the house to do laundry. Myrna froze. Marta froze. They stood facing each other, a living woman and a dead old woman in a bonnet. Myrna said she needed water. Marta held out a bucket. Myrna took it. She looked at Marta. Martha looked at Myrna. Then she went to the well for another bucket. That evening, Myrna sat by the stove with a pipe. Artem didn't know where she'd gotten the pipe. She smoked in silence. Then she said that Martha had given her the bucket. Artem replied that yes, he'd seen it. Myrna said that the dead don't hand out buckets. The dead eat the living and howl at night. That's what the church says. But this one stands there in her bonnet, holding out a bucket. And her eyes are empty, but her hands are kind. Artem replied that Martha had a dislocated shoulder when she was alive. For years, she hadn't been able to lift her right arm properly. Now she can. Maybe she's just happy that her arms work. Myrna took a drag on her pipe. She exhaled. She said he was strange. Artem agreed. In the 4th week, Myrna saw Artem at work. For real. He had dug up the 7th body from the cemetery. A woman. Young. She died in childbirth. The baby hadn't survived either. They were both lying in the same coffin. Artem stood over the coffin for a long time, in silence. Myrna stood behind him and was silent too. Then he said he wouldn't dig up the baby. Myrna asked why. Artem replied that the body was too small. The bones weren't fully formed, the joints weren't developed. He could bring it back to life, but it wouldn't be able to function, and it wouldn't be able to live a normal life. That wouldn't be helping it. It would be torture. Myrna looked at him and said nothing. He buried the child separately, a small grave next to a tree. Leah brought flowers, wildflowers, yellow ones, and placed them on the mound. Artem lifted the woman. He set her pelvis right. He realigned her spine, which had shifted during childbirth. He put her ribs back in place. He worked for 3 hours. Myrna watched, without looking away. When the woman stood up, Myrna approached and examined her. With a professional eye, she felt her joints, checked her range of motion. Then she turned to Artem and said she had a surgeon's suture, not a butcher's. Artem replied that he was, in fact, a surgeon. It's just that his patients usually moan rather than remain silent. Myrna almost smiled again. He named the woman Rena. Now there were 8 people under their care. 8 bodies, 8 medical histories, 8 patients whom no one but him would have agreed to treat. Artem felt tired, not physically, energetic. Every revival took a piece of the dark wave from his chest. 8 revivals in 2 months. Kiran's body was thin and weak. His reserves weren't infinite. He needed time. Time to recover. Time to grow. A teenager's body is growing. Muscles are strengthening. Channels are expanding. He could feel it. Every week his reserves were slightly greater than the week before, like a foal gaining weight, slowly but steadily. Myrna began eating with them at the common table. Leah chattered non-stop. She told Myrna about each of the charges, how Yorick carried logs, how Pasha climbed roofs, how Marta swept, how Grill cleaned fish, how Helga chopped wood. Myrna listened. She smoked her pipe. Sometimes she would interject a brief comment, dry and precise, like a scalpel. She was sarcastic, weary, and smoke-stained. But she was alive, and she was here. In the evenings, Artem and Myrna would sit by the stove and talk. He told her about bodies, about how joints and muscles work, about why it's important to repair them before lifting, not after, about how care strengthens bodies. Myrna listened and asked questions, sharp ones, uncomfortable ones. She asked if he used them. Artem asked what she meant. Myrna replied that she meant it literally. They work for him. They build his house. They plow his field. They can't say no. They can't leave. Is this slavery or not? Artem was silent for a long time. Then he replied that he thought about it every day, that he didn't know, that the only thing he could do was do his job well, fix them, take care of them, give them names, give them clothes, give them work suited to their bodies, and hope that this is enough. Myrna smoked and remained silent. Then she said that her mother had died from a festering wound because the church wouldn't let a doctor in without a donation, that she had become a healer so that nothing like that would ever happen again, that the church had declared her a heretic for treating the poor in exchange for food rather than silver, that she'd walked for 3 weeks without knowing where she was going, and that now she was sitting by the stove with a necromancer drinking tea, and that a dead old woman in a bonnet had brought her a blanket when she'd fallen asleep on a bench. Marta brought the blanket, on her own, without being asked, without being told. She saw that a living woman was sleeping uncovered. She took the blanket. She covered her. Myrna said it was the scariest and kindest thing that had ever happened to her at the same time. Artem replied that you get used to it. Myrna replied that she wasn't sure she wanted to get used to it, but she didn't want to leave either. They finished their tea. Myrna went to her room. Artem stayed by the stove. He thought about what Myrna had said. Slavery or not. He'd thought about it before, too. Every time Yorick hauled a log. Every time Marta swept the yard. They didn't choose. They didn't ask. They just did what he showed them. But they were learning. They were growing. Marta brought a blanket, on her own, without a word. This isn't slavery. Slaves don't bring blankets. Slaves don't wear bonnets. Slaves don't nod when asked. This was something else. He didn't know what yet, but it was something else. It rained that night, the first rain in a month. Artem stepped out onto the porch and listened. The rain pounded on the new roofs that Pasha had repaired, on the clean yard that Marta had swept, on the green field that Artem had sown and Yorick had plowed. Quiet Dole stood in the darkness under the rain. A small village at the edge of the world, 6 dead, 3 alive, 1 dead dog, and silence. Not empty, not dead. A silence in which someone is breathing, in which someone is sleeping, in which someone is standing guard. Artem closed his eyes and listened to the rain. He thought of the foal he had saved on the last evening of his former life. He'd pieced it back together bit by bit for 4 hours. The foal had survived. Now he was piecing something else back together. Not a foal, a village, a family, a place to live, a place where the dead and the living are side by side, where no one yells that you're filthy, where Leah can sleep peacefully, where Myrna can heal without fear. He opened his eyes. The rain was falling. The roofs were holding up. Everything was working. For now. The 3rd month began with a scream. Artem woke up to the sound of Yugolok standing by the door and scratching at the wood with her claws. A dead dog doesn't bark, but it can scratch. Artem jumped up, grabbed a knife, ran out onto the porch. Early morning. Fog. Figures were moving along the road toward the village. Not 1, not 2, 7, no, 8 people. Alive. They were walking slowly, stumbling. 1 was carrying another on his back. 2 more were supporting a 3rd by the arms. Refugees. Artem lowered his knife. He walked toward the gate. Myrna followed him out. No phone, no words. With her tool bag. They approached at the same time. 8 people. 3 men, 2 women, 3 children. All thin, all dirty. 1 man had a laceration on his leg. It was festering. The stench was so strong that Artem recognized it from 10 steps away. Gangrene. He'd smelled it hundreds of times. On cows, on horses, on sheep. It smelled the same here. Myrna was already at work. She dropped to her knees. She cut open the pant leg. She examined the wound. Her expression didn't change. Only her eyes narrowed. She turned to Artem and said the leg had to be amputated. Today. Otherwise, he'd be dead by morning. The man heard her. He began to beg. He said that without his leg, he wouldn't be able to work, that his family would be ruined, that it would be better to die. Artem looked at him, then at Myrna, then at the leg, and said he'd try his own method first. Myrna looked at him as if he were crazy. Artem explained. He'd seen gangrene, not in people but in animals. The principle was the same. Dead tissue infects the living. You have to remove the dead tissue and leave the living tissue intact, precisely without amputation. He worked for 4 hours. Myrna assisted him. At first, she was skeptical. Then she became interested. Then she felt admiration, which she hid behind her pursed lips. Artem cut, carefully, layer by layer. He removed the dead tissue. He left the living tissue. He rinsed the area with a decoction that Myrna prepared right there. Mountain mint, white clover, wormwood for disinfection. Yorick held the man by the shoulders. His dead hands were strong. They didn't tremble. They didn't tire. The perfect assistant for a surgeon. The man screamed for the first half hour. Then he lost consciousness. That was even better. When Artem finished, a fist-sized indentation remained where the wound had been. Red, clean, living flesh free of rot. Myrna applied a bandage with ointment. Artem stood up. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from tension. 4 hours with a knife over living flesh. He was used to dead flesh. Living flesh is different. Living flesh bleeds. Living flesh screams. Living flesh can die while you're cutting. The man survived. A week later, he started walking. He limped, but he walked, on 2 legs. His wife looked at Artem the way people look at saints. Artem asked her not to look at him that way. He was just a veterinarian. The refugees stayed. They had nowhere else to go. They had come from the south, from a village that had been devoured by the rift, not by demons. The rift itself, the earth cracked, it turned black. The trees died overnight. The livestock fell and didn't get back up. People fled in all directions. These 8 fled north. For 3 weeks, without food, without hope. They saw smoke rising from the chimneys of Quiet Valley and headed toward it. Artem settled them in 2 empty houses. Yorick and Helga repaired the roofs in a single day. Pasha installed new window frames. Marta brought blankets and dishes. Grill hauled in water. The refugees looked at the dead workers and remained silent. The children hid behind their mothers. A man with an injured leg lay there, unable to see anything. He was lucky. The first encounter between the living and the dead is always difficult. Artem knew this. That evening, he gathered the refugees around a communal campfire. He introduced each person in their care by name. This is Yorick. He builds houses. This is Marta. She takes care of the household. This is Pasha. He repairs roofs. and so on. By name, by job, as people, not as tools. The children were the first to stop hiding. Children are always the quickest. 2 days later, a boy of about 10 was already following Pasha around, watching him climb the roofs. 3 days later, a girl of about 6 was sitting next to Marta, helping her sweep. A week later, one of the men approached Artem and asked how he could help. His name was Tobias, a farmer. Strong. He had big hands. He was used to working. He wasn't used to sitting around doing nothing. Artem sent him out to the field with Yorick. Tobias worked alongside the dead farmer and didn't complain. An hour later, they were plowing in unison, the living and the dead, shoulder to shoulder. Artem stood at the edge of the field and watched, and he thought that it was working. The living and the dead side by side, not in terror, not in revulsion, at work, in a common cause, amid fatigue, dust, and sweat. Myrna stood nearby with her pipe. She said that if someone had told her 3 months ago that she'd be standing in a field watching a skeleton plow the earth next to a living man, she would have had a drink and gone to bed. Artem replied that 3 months ago, he had been dead. Myrna looked at him. He didn't bother to explain. The fourth third month brought problems. Not human ones. Others. Artem was standing by the fence at night when he sensed it. A smell. Not the smell of rot, nor the smell of smoke. Something else. Sour. Heavy. Like iron mixed with something organic. Ugolok stood nearby, trembling. A dead dog can't shiver from the cold. It can't tremble with fear, but Ugolok was trembling. Artem looked into the darkness beyond the fence. There was something there, not a human, not a beast, something that moved wrong, in jerks, as if it didn't know how to walk in this world. A demon. He'd never seen a demon before, but the dark energy in his chest recognized it. It twitched inside him, like a compass needle that had found north. The demon sensed his energy, and he sensed the demon. The creature didn't come any closer. It stood behind the trees at the edge of the forest and watched. Artem could see its eyes, 2 red spots at human head level, but the distance between them was too great. Its head was wider than a human's, or its eyes were larger, or both. They stood facing each other for about 10 minutes, a man and a creature. Between them was a fence and 20 paces of darkness. Then the demon left. It vanished into the forest. The red dots faded. The scent grew fainter. Ugolka stopped trembling. Artem stood by the fence until dawn. In the morning, he walked around the perimeter. He found tracks. 3 claws, deep indentations in the ground. Each footprint was the size of his palm. The creature was large, as big as a horse, maybe even bigger. It had come from the south, from the direction of the rift, and it had been drawn by his energy. He realized this immediately. Necro energy attracts demons, just as blood attracts sharks. Every time he raises a body, he sends out a signal, and someone hears that signal. That changed everything. It meant that Quiet Hollow couldn't just be a farm. He needed protection, walls, guards, weapons. He needed people under his command who could do more than just plow fields and build. He needed soldiers. He gathered Myrna and Tobias. He told them what he'd seen that night. Tobias turned pale. He'd seen the demons in the south. He'd seen what they were doing to the villages. Myrna didn't turn pale. She took a drag on her pipe and asked what his plan was. Artem said he needed walls. Stone walls. Tall ones. With gates that close. He needs stakes around the walls. A moat if possible. And he needs to rebuild some of his charges. Myrna asked what rebuild meant. Artem explained. Bodies can be developed. If you push them to their limits, the body changes. The bones become denser. The muscles thicken. He'd seen this in Yorick. After 2 months of hard work, Yorick became stronger than he had been in life. His bones became denser, his muscles thicker, his joints stiffer. If you subject a body to military-grade training, it becomes military-grade. Tobias asked if he was going to turn them into soldiers. Artem replied that he wasn't. He was going to turn them into guards. The difference is that guards protect while soldiers attack. His charges would protect Quiet Valley, Lu, and the refugees. Everyone who lives here. He chose 3, Yorick, Helga, and Rena, the strongest bodies, the sturdiest bones. He put them to work at their limits. Yorick hauled stones, not logs, but stones. Heavier, harder, 10 hours a day. Helga chopped down trees, not thin, young trees for a fence. Old oaks, Thick, heavy, the axe would dull within an hour. She would sharpen it and chop again. Rena carried water and sand for the mortar, by the bucketful, non-stop. 2 weeks later, Artem examined them. There were results. Yorick's bones felt denser to the touch. His joints were stronger. His muscles weren't growing like those of the living. They were hardening, becoming as stiff as wood. Harder, faster, stronger. It was working. The body adapted to the strain, like an athlete's, only faster, without pain, without fatigue, without limits. They spent a month building the wall. Stones from the riverbed, mortar made of clay and sand, 3 meters high, half a meter thick. Not a fortress, but enough to hold them off. A gate made of oak logs. Tobias helped. He knew about construction. Peasants always know about construction. Artem learned from him. How to lay stones, how to mix mortar, how to set the gate so it wouldn't warp. A grown man was teaching a boy. Tobias didn't know that inside the boy was a 34-year-old veterinarian. He simply saw a young man who wanted to learn, and he taught him. The wall encircled the village. Quiet Valley became a closed-off settlement. A gate to the south, a gate to the north. Between them, a stone wall and a moat filled with water from the stream. It wouldn't stop a serious creature, but it would slow it down. Artem put Yorick and Helga on night watch, with scythes. He didn't have any real swords, but a scythe in the hands of a dead peasant, with bones and muscles as hard as an oak root, is a formidable weapon. The demon didn't return. But Artem knew it would come back, or another one would come. They sense him. They know where he is. And sooner or later, they'll come, not to look, but to devour. The 5th month brought Hannah Sobieski. She came at night, alone, without a flame, without a sound. Ugolka sensed her a minute before she appeared at the gate. Yorick stood on the wall with his scythe. He saw a shadow. He didn't move. The dead don't panic. The dead wait. The shadow approached the gate and stopped. Artem came out with a torch. Standing before him was a woman of about 29, tall, lean, short hair, a scar on her chin. Her clothes were travel attire, but not peasant clothing. Military cut, belts in the right places, a scabbard on her hip, empty. She'd either lost her sword or thrown it away. Her eyes were the kind Artem had seen in dogs after a long illness, alive but empty, as if the fuel inside had run out and her body was running on its last drops. She looked at Yorick on the wall, at the braid in his hands, at his empty eyes, then at Artem, and she said she needed to stay the night, just one night. She'd leave in the morning. Artem let her in. He gave her a room. He gave her food. Marta brought a blanket. Hannah looked at the dead old woman in a bonnet, holding the blanket. She didn't flinch. She didn't recoil. She took the blanket. She said thank you. She lay down and fell asleep in a minute. A person who falls asleep in a minute in an unfamiliar place next to the dead is someone who stopped being afraid a long time ago, or who simply doesn't care. In the morning, she didn't leave. She sat on the porch and looked out at the village, at the people in her care who were working, at Leah, who was running between them, at Myrna, who came out with a pipe and nodded to her, at Tobias, who was hauling planks toward the barn. Artem approached and asked if she was planning to leave. Hannah replied that she was, but first she wanted to understand who he was. Artem replied that he was a necromancer. Hannah said that necromancers don't build villages. Necromancers raise armies and devour cities. Artem replied that he was a bad necromancer. Hannah didn't smile, but something shifted in her eyes. She stayed for a 2nd day, a 3rd, a 4th. On the 5th day, she approached Artem and said she was a former scout for the kingdom of Stavia, that she had deserted, that she had been ordered to burn down a village of refugees on the southern border, that she had refused. That refusal was punishable by death, that she had fled, that she had nowhere to go, that she hadn't been able to sleep without wine for 2 years, that she had killed people, not in war, on orders, in peacetime, that the orders had been carried out before she refused the last one, that she didn't know why she was telling this to a young necromancer in a village of skeletons, but she told him anyway. Artem listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't say that everything would be all right. He knew that not everything would be all right. Some things can't be fixed. Some fractures won't heal. He told her one thing, that here she wouldn't be ordered to burn down villages, and that there was no alcohol here but Myrna was brewing something from berries that served as a decent substitute. Hannah looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. She became the commandant of Quiet Hollow within a week, not because Artem appointed her, because she started doing it on her own. She inspected the walls. She set up sentries. She assigned night shifts. She drew a map of the surrounding area from memory. She found weak spots in the defenses and secured them. Artem didn't interfere. He could see that she knew what she was doing. A military man in a peaceful place. She was transforming Tikidol from a farm into a fortress. Quietly, methodically, without unnecessary words. By the 6th month, the population of Tikidol had grown. 2 more people had arrived, an old man and his granddaughter, from the east. The old man was a blacksmith. His hands were black with soot up to his elbows, forever. His granddaughter was about 12 years old, quiet. She looked like Leah, only meaner. Leah was afraid of people. This girl wasn't afraid. She hated them. Her parents had been killed by bandits on the road. Her grandfather took her in and set off wherever his eyes led him. His eyes led him here. The blacksmith looked at his new charges, at the wall, at Artem, and asked if there was a blacksmith shop here. Artem replied that there wasn't. The blacksmith said there would be. His name was Horst. His granddaughter's name was Nina. Horst began building the smithy the very next day. Artem assigned Helga to help him. In life, Helga had worked with an axe, hands made for hard work. Horst watched her. The dead woman hauled stones for the smithy's foundation, without complaint, without stopping. Horst shook his head and said he hadn't had an apprentice like that in 50 years. The smithy was up and running in 3 weeks. Small, with 1 forge and 1 anvil, but a real one. Horst forged nails, staples, hinges, spearheads, knives, real knives. Not that stub Artem had been carrying around since day 1. Artem asked Horst to make tools, surgical ones. He drew them on paper, a scalpel, clamps, tweezers, and a suture needle. Horst looked at the drawings and asked what each one was for. Artem explained. Horst forged them. They turned out rough but sturdy. The steel was pure. Myrna took half the instruments for herself. She looked at the scalpel. She turned it over in her hands. She tried it on a piece of leather, and she said it was better than the ones she'd bought in the capital for silver. Horst grunted with satisfaction. Artem took the other half. He needed instruments for working on bodies. Until then, he'd been using a butcher's knife. A dull one, rough, imprecise. Every operation on his patients had been a struggle with that tool. Now he had a scalpel, thin, sharp, precise. He picked up Grill and laid him on the table. He examined him again. He found what he hadn't been able to find before without a tool, a microfracture in the left thigh, old, from when he was alive. It didn't interfere with walking but weakened the bone. Sooner or later it would break. He cut through the tissue with his new scalpel. Cleanly, smoothly. He reached the bone, found the crack, smoothed the edges. Inserted a metal plate into the gap, one that Horst had forged according to his blueprint. Secured it. He sutured it up. The grill stood up. His left leg became stronger than his right. Artem made a note on the chart. Metal bone reinforcement. It works. This opened up new possibilities. If metal could be inserted into bones, then the entire skeleton could be strengthened. That meant his charges could be made stronger. That meant the guards on the walls could be stronger than any living warrior. He thought about this that evening. He was sitting with Myrna by the stove. She was smoking. He was drawing diagrams. Myrna glanced at his notes. She looked at the sketch of a skeleton with metal plates in its bones, and she said that he wasn't building people. He was building machines. Artem replied that no, machines don't wear bonnets. Myrna took a long drag on her pipe and was silent for a long time. Then she said his logic was strange, but it worked. In the 7th month, the very thing Artem had been protecting Voron for finally happened. An old man with thin bones and channels in his skull. Artem didn't understand what those channels were, but now he had the tools. And now Myrna was by his side. A healer, a person who knew magic. Not necromancy, living magic, the magic of healing. He asked Myrna if she could take a look at Voron's skull. Myrna refused. Then she agreed. Then she refused again. Then she came to the workshop at 3 in the morning and said she couldn't sleep, and since she wasn't sleeping anyway, she might as well take a look. She placed her hands on Voron's skull. She closed her eyes, and a minute later she jerked her hands away as if she'd been burned. Artem asked what she'd found. Myrna said they were mana channels. Thin, empty, but channels nonetheless, like those of mages. Only in living mages they're open from birth. But in this old man, they'd been closed his entire life, sealed, like overgrown veins. Artem asked if they could be opened. Myrna said it wasn't possible in a living person. It would kill him. A mana explosion in closed channels would shatter the skull. Artem asked, "What about a dead person?" Myrna fell silent for a long time. Then she said she didn't know. A dead person has no mana. A dead person has no pressure. If you open the channels, nothing will explode, but there won't be any mana either. Empty pipes, Artem thought. Empty pipes, like a water pipe. If you lay pipes, the water won't flow on its own. You need a source. You need a pump. He asked Myrna where mana comes from. Myrna explained that mana is the energy of the world. It's everywhere, in the air, in the ground, in the water. Mages simply know how to draw it in through the channels in their skulls and direct it through their hands. Artem thought some more. The world's energy. It's everywhere. So it must be around Voron too. If he opens the channels and mana is everywhere, then mana will flow on its own, like water in an open pipe. Gravity, pressure, osmosis. He didn't know which of these principles applied to magic, but he knew that empty channels near a source of energy were an invitation. He picked up a scalpel, a new one, sharp, made of horsed steel, and he began working on the raven's skull, carefully, slowly. He didn't know the anatomy of magical channels, but he knew the anatomy of ordinary ones: nerves, veins, lymphatic ducts. The mana channels followed the same paths, parallel to the nerves, along the veins, like a backup system. He cleared them, one by one, with a thin scalpel. Just as one clears clogged vessels. Myrna stood nearby and guided him. She could sense the channels. He could see the tissue. Together, they worked like a surgeon and a navigator. 4 hours, 7 channels, each thinner than a hair, each clogged with something resembling calcified film. Artem removed the film. Myrna checked for patency. By dawn, all 7 channels were clear. Voron lay on the table, a dead old man with his magical channels open. They waited. Nothing happened. Myrna said she'd thought as much. No source, no mana. Artem disagreed. He placed his palms on Voron's skull and sent his energy through it. Not a dark wave to awaken him, a thin trickle, like a jolt, like a starter for an engine. Voron twitched. The channels in his skull flared up. Myrna jumped back. Light streamed from Voron's fingers. Not black, not dark, pale blue, faint, like the light of a distant star. But it was light, mana. A dead old man who, in life, had never possessed a magical gift had, for the first time in the history of this world, channeled mana through himself. Myrna sat on the floor and looked at her hands. They were shaking. She said it was impossible. Artem replied that yesterday it had been impossible. Today it was a fact. She looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't just almost smile. She smiled for real. Voron had become something new. Not just a ward. Not just a dead body that walks and works. He had become proof. Proof that the boundaries this world considered unbreakable could be broken. A skeleton mage. Words that no one in Valgard had ever put together. A dead person cannot be a mage. A mage cannot be dead. That is the law. That is dogma. That is the foundation of all foundations. Artem did not know this law. That is why he broke it. In the early days, Voron was unstable. Mana flowed through the channels erratically, in bursts. Sometimes light from his fingers, sometimes sparks from his eye sockets, sometimes nothing at all. Artem observed and took notes. Channel number 3 was malfunctioning. The flow was interrupted near the temporal bone. Cause: a micro crack in the channel. Solution: reinforce the channel wall with a metal thread. He worked with Voron every evening. Fine-tuning, just like tuning a musical instrument. Tighten it up a little here, loosen it a little over there. Myrna helped. She sensed the flows of mana and told him where it was flowing and where it wasn't. He cleaned, repaired, and reinforced. After 2 weeks, Voron had stabilized. The mana flowed steadily. Not strongly, a weak mage by the standards of the living, but stable, and capable of learning. Artem set him a task, a very simple one, to light a fire on the tip of his finger. Myrna demonstrated the technique. Concentrating mana at a single point, accelerating particles, heat, flame. A living mage learns this in a month. Voron lit the fire on the 3rd day. Myrna said that wasn't fair. Living mages take a month because they struggle with fear and habits. Voron has nothing to fear, and he has no habits. A pure body, pure skill. Artem nodded. The same principle as with Marta and the broom, with Pasha and the roof. An empty body learns quickly because nothing gets in its way. A month later, Voron was lighting fires. He was creating a small shield out of compressed air. He was moving small objects from a distance. Basic skills. Weak, but skills nonetheless. And every day, he was a little stronger than the day before. Artem began to think about channels in other bodies. Yorick had no channels. Helga had none. Marta had some, but they were very thin, almost like threads. Working with them would be too risky. He could damage the bones of the skull. But now he knew what to look for. He would check every new body, and if there were channels, he would open them. Myrna said he was creating a new kind of magic. Artem replied that he wasn't. He was simply fixing what had been broken since birth. This old man had had channels his whole life. They were just overgrown, sealed. No one had cleared them. No one had checked them. He'd lived 60 years without knowing he could be a mage. This isn't new magic. It's a missed opportunity. Myrna smoked and said nothing. Then she quietly remarked that it was interesting how many people walk around with sealed channels without even knowing it. Artem looked at her. She looked at him. They both realized she was thinking about herself, but neither of them said it out loud. In the 8th month, So-yeon Park arrived. She was unlike anyone else in Quiet Valley. Small, quick, with a round face and black eyes that smiled even when her mouth didn't. A nun's habit. Simple. Gray, with a symbol embroidered on the back that Artem didn't recognize. A circle with 4 lines. A cross within a wheel. She came from the east, from the kingdom of Hwanmyeong. She'd been walking for 2 weeks, alone, unarmed, without supplies. She ate whatever she could find, berries, roots, water from streams. She was as skinny as a stray cat, and as cheerful as a child at a festival. She entered the gates of Quiet Valley, and the first thing she did was bow to Yorick, who was standing guard. A full, deep bow, as if before an elder, as if before a teacher. Yorick stood there, staring at her with empty eyes. So-yeon straightened up and said he was beautiful. Artem approached and asked who she was. So-yeon turned to him. She looked at him for a long time. She smiled, and she declared that he was the living embodiment of the old mother. Artem replied that he wasn't. He was a veterinarian. So-yeon said that the old mother also cared for bodies. Artem said he was serious. He was just a veterinarian. So-yeon replied that she was serious too. She explained, the ancient cult of Mother Earth, a faith that existed before the Church of the One. A faith in which death is not a punishment but a part of life. Winter follows autumn. Sleep follows the day. The body returns to the earth, and the earth returns it when the time comes. The church destroyed the cult 200 years ago. It burned the temples. It killed the priests. It read the name. But the teachings remained. In old books. In the songs grandmothers sing to their grandchildren. In the memories of those who haven't forgotten. So-yeon was a nun at the Eastern Monastery. She found the old texts in the library. She began to preach. She said that death is not an evil, that a dead body is not a sin, that earth and flesh are one. She was excommunicated, banished, called a heretic and a madwoman. She wandered for 2 years. Then she heard a rumor. In the north, there is a village where the dead work alongside the living, where a necromancer heals bodies rather than maims souls, where skeletons have names and wear clean clothes. She followed that rumor as if it were a light, and she found it. Artem listened to her and felt an uneasy sensation growing inside him. He didn't want to be the embodiment of anything. He wanted to be a veterinarian who mends bodies. So-yeon looked at him with such a glow in her eyes that he wanted to hide behind Yorick. She stayed. Of course she stayed. Where else could she go? And Quiet Valley took her in, just as it took everyone in. So-yeon found her place instantly. She became a bridge between the living and the dead, between fear and understanding. She spoke to those in her care as if they were people, not like Leah, who chatted with them as if they were cats, not like Artem, who spoke to them like a doctor speaks to patients. So-yeon spoke to them as if they were brothers and sisters. She sang songs to them, old songs in a language no one understood, songs of the Mother Earth cult. And the residents listened. They turned their heads. They froze. Once, Marta stopped her broom mid-swing and stood there until So-yeon finished singing. Artem saw this and recorded it. Music, voice, attention. All of this strengthens the bond. All of this makes their bodies stronger. Care is like fuel. He didn't understand the mechanism, but he saw the result. The refugees, who until then had been avoiding those in their care, began to get used to them. Soyeon explained things to them, calmly, patiently, without pressure. She told them that the dead here weren't scary, they were just different, like trees in winter, bare, without leaves, but alive on the inside, waiting for spring. Not everyone believed her, but the fear was fading, slowly, drop by drop, like water from a wet cloth. The 10th month, the population of Quiet Valley, 12 charges. Artem retrieved 4 more from the cemetery and the surrounding forests. He found the body of a hunter in a ravine. He'd fallen and broken his neck. The body had been preserved in the clay. Artem set the vertebrae. He inserted metal pins between the 3rd and 4th, horsed steel. The hunter stood up, strong. Quick, a body adapted to the forest. Artem named him Strel and put him on patrol with Ugalok, 2 dead sentries, a dog and a hunter. They patrolled the forest around Tiki Dole every night. There were already 14 of the living, Tobias and his family, Horst and his granddaughter, 3 more refugee families who had come from the east and south at different times, Mirna, Hannah, Soyeon, Leah, and himself. 14 living and 12 dead, and silence. Quiet Valley lived on, a strange, impossible existence that no one in Valgard could have imagined. A village where a skeleton grandmother in a bonnet serves tea to living children, where a dead blacksmith helps a living one forge nails, where a hunter without a pulse patrols the forest more precisely than any guard, where a skeleton mage learns to light a fire. Artem stood on the wall in the evening and looked south. Somewhere out there was the rift. There were demons. There was darkness creeping toward them. Slowly, but surely, he could feel it. The dark energy in his chest vibrated like a string. Something was approaching, not a demon, something else, someone who was coming toward him not to hide, but to find. Cale Morven arrived at dawn on the 11th month, alone, in full armor of the Order of the White Flame. White steel with a golden sun engraved on the breastplate, a sword at his belt, a shield on his back, a white cloak embroidered with a flame. He walked openly along the road toward the gates of Quiet Hollow, not hiding, not sneaking, like a man accustomed to being the first to walk through any door. Hannah saw him from the wall half a kilometer away. She recognized the armor. She went down to Artem. Her face was ashen. She said he was a paladin of the Order of the White Flame, an elite inquisitor. She said that if he was here, it meant he knew about Artem, about the charges, about everything. Artem asked if he was alone or with a squad. Hannah replied that he was alone. Artem thought for a moment. A paladin of the Order is coming alone, without backup, without troops. That means one of 2 things. Either he's so strong he doesn't need backup, or he didn't come to fight, or both. Artem headed for the gate. Hannah followed him. Mirna stepped out onto the porch and stood there with her pipe. Soyeon stopped singing. Leah walked up to Artem and took his hand. He looked at her. She was 8. Over the past year, she had grown 5 centimeters and learned to read from the old books Soyeon had found in one of the houses. She wasn't afraid of the dead, but she'd never seen the living in armor, and Artem could feel her fingers tightening around his palm. He told her to wait inside the house. Leah shook her head. He didn't argue. Cale Morven stopped at the gate. He looked at the wall. At Yorick standing atop it with a scythe, at Strel with a bow, at Helga with an axe. 3 dead guards on the wall. Empty eyes, weapons at the ready. Cale didn't flinch. He looked at them the way one looks at an opponent they respect, without fear, without disgust, with a cold, professional assessment. Then he looked at Artem, a boy, skinny, in a dirty shirt, with a knife at his belt and a girl by the hand. A paladin and a necromancer. They stood on opposite sides of the gate and looked at each other. Cale said he had come to look, not to kill, just to look. For now. Artem opened the gate. Cale walked in. His hand didn't touch the sword, but it didn't stray far from the hilt either. They walked through the village. Artem pointed things out. Here are the houses. Here's the field. Here's the well. Here's the blacksmith's shop. Cale watched. At the workers toiling away. At Martha sweeping the yard in her bonnet. At Grill carrying buckets of water. At Pasha repairing the roof. At the living children running among the dead workers, unafraid. Cale stopped when he saw the raven. The old man was sitting by the house, holding a small flame in his palms. Pale blue, steady. He was practicing. 3 hours every day, keeping the flame steady. Cale looked at the dead mage for a long time. Then he turned to Artem and said it was impossible. Artem replied that he'd already been told that. Kale didn't smile. They sat by the fire until late at night. Hannah stood in the shadows by the wall, never taking her eyes off the paladin. Myrna sat on the porch and smoked. Soyan went to her charges and sang. Leah fell asleep on Artem's lap. Kale told his story. 3 years ago, his wife Elena and his son Mateo, a classic necromancer, had raised them. Not like Artem, the old-fashioned way. He summoned their souls back. He made them suffer. He made them hate. He made them attack Kale. He killed them with his own hands, his wife and his son. Because what stood before him wasn't them. They were their bodies, filled with pain and rage and a will that wasn't their own. He killed them and burned the necromancer. And ever since then, he has killed every necromancer he has found. 11. In 3 years, 11 necromancers. All the same. All raised the dead by force. All of them inflicted suffering. All of them were monsters. And then he heard about the 12th, a boy from the north, who doesn't torment the dead but mends them, who gives them names, who lives with a child and a healer. Kale didn't believe it, but he came to check it out. Artem listened. Then he asked if Kale wanted to see him at work. Kale nodded. Artem stood up. He woke up Leah. He carried her into the house. He returned. He led Kale to the workshop. Lying on the table was a patient he was preparing to revive, a woman from a village to the west. Strel found the body while on patrol. He brought her in. She'd been lying in a ditch. She died of starvation. Her body was emaciated. Her bones were visible through her skin. Artem showed Kale. Here's the wrist, a fracture, an old one. See how it's grown back crooked? Here's the knee, a dislocation, never set. She limped her whole life. Here are the ribs. 2 are broken, not from a fall, from a blow. Someone beat her. Her husband, her father, it doesn't matter. The marks on the bones don't lie. Artem went to work, calmly, methodically, like during surgery. He set the wrist. He fixed the knee. He realigned the ribs. He smoothed them out. He reinforced them. Kale stood and watched, not at Artem's hands, at his face. A boyish face with eyes that held neither malice nor madness nor a thirst for power. Only concentration, only attention, only care. Artem placed his palms on the woman's chest. A dark wave flowed through his hands, gentle, quiet. Not a jolt, not a blow, like a warm current. The woman opened her eyes, empty, clear, without pain, without fear, without any memory of hunger or beatings. She sat up, looked around, looked at Artem, looked at Kale, and tilted her head to one side, like a puppy seeing something new. Artem told her name was Iva. She didn't answer, but she looked at him, and there was something in that gaze that made Kale turn away, because it looked like trust, and he didn't want to see trust in the eyes of a dead person. They returned to the campfire. They sat in silence. Kale stared at the fire. Artem waited. He didn't rush her. He didn't try to persuade her. He knew you couldn't rush things. It was like with a frightened animal. Sit quietly. Wait. It will come on its own. Or it won't. That's its choice. Kale spoke just before dawn. He said he'd seen necromancers, 11 of them, all different and all the same. Greedy, evil, hungry for power. The dead were just tools to them, weapons, trash, and Artem sews their shirts. Artem replied that Leah sews the shirts. Kale looked at him. Then he said he didn't know what to do, that it was his duty to kill Artem, that the order had sent him to do just that if he returned without a necromancer's head, he himself would be executed. Artem asked, "What if you don't come back at all?" Kale was silent for a long time. Then he stood up, put on his helmet, took his shield. He walked toward the gate. He stopped at the gate. He turned around. And he said that he hadn't found the necromancer. He'd looked but hadn't found him. The rumors turned out to be lies. That's exactly what he'd report to the order. And if Artem had even a shred of sense, he'd take his village and flee deeper into the mountains. Because next time, the order wouldn't send just one. Artem said he wouldn't leave. Kale looked at him, then at Leah, who was standing in the doorway of the house watching, then at Martha, who was sweeping the yard, then at Yorick on the wall, and he said one word, "Madman." Then he left. Artem stood by the gate and watched as the white armor disappeared behind the trees. Hannah approached from behind. She asked what he had said. Artem replied that they were madmen. Hannah nodded and said the paladin was right. Then she went to check on the guard posts. After Kale left, Artem didn't sleep for 3 days. Not because he was afraid, because he was thinking. The paladin had given them time. How much he didn't know. A month, 2, half a year. Sooner or later, the order would send another, or the same Kale, but not alone this time. Quiet Valley had to be ready, not for battle. Artem didn't want a battle, but to survive. He convened a council, the first real council in Quiet Valley. Hannah, Myrna, Soyan, Tobias, Horst, 5 people he trusted. He told them everything. What the Order knew about him, that the paladin had left but would return, that the demons in the south could sense his energy, that the village was growing and rumors were growing with it, that sooner or later someone would come, the church or the demons or both. Hannah said they needed intelligence, a network of lookouts on the roads, traps at the approaches, a signaling system. She could organize it all. She needed people, the living for surveillance, the dead for patrols. Myrna said she needed a real infirmary, not just a room with a bench and a bucket of water, a field hospital, clean tables, instruments. A supply of herbs, assistants who don't get tired of holding a patient. She looked at Artem and added that assistants who don't breathe are even better, more sterile. Soyan said she needed a temple, a small one, made of logs, with an altar, a place where refugees can come and find peace, a place where the living can get used to the dead, not in a field, but in prayer. Tobias said he needed seeds. The grain was running out. One field wouldn't feed 30 mouths in the winter. They needed a second field. They needed livestock, goats, chickens, anything alive that chews the cud. Horst said he needed ore. The village is running out of iron. He's reforged all the old nails and staples. Soon there will be nothing left to forge with. Artem listened. Everyone spoke to the point. Everyone needs something beyond Quiet Hollow. Seeds, ore, livestock, information. All of that is out there, beyond the walls, beyond the forest, in a world that wants to kill him. So someone has to go out. Hannah volunteered first. She knew the roads. She knew how to move unnoticed. She knew where to find merchants who don't ask questions. Artem gave her silver, not much, coins they'd found in the village houses, saved up by the late residents. Now their savings would go toward seeds and goats. Hannah left at dawn, alone, without any dead companions. The dead attract attention. Artem waited for her for 5 days. On the 6th day, Hannah returned, with 3, a sack of seeds, a bar of iron, and news. The news was bad. The rift was widening. The southern border had retreated another 20 leagues. There were more refugees. The roads were clogged. The royal army was retreating. The church was mobilizing paladins. The Inquisition is stepping up its hunt for mages and necromancers. 3 burnings in the last month in the nearest town. 2 of those burned were simple herbalists accused of sorcery. Myrna listened to this with a stony face. The pipe between her teeth didn't tremble, but her fingers had turned white. Artem saw it. Hannah also brought a rumor about a village in the mountains. The rumor was spreading. A merchant she'd met at the market told her that up north there was a place where the dead worked, where skeletons plowed the fields, where a necromancer healed people instead of killing them. The merchant laughed. He called it a fairy tale for fools, but he told it anyway, and others listened. Artem realized that time was running out. The rumor would reach the Order, to the church, to the capital, and then one paladin wouldn't be enough. He had to decide, to flee or to stand his ground, to go deeper into the mountains as Kale had advised, or to fortify himself and wait. He chose a third option, to grow, not to hide and not to wait. Grow, become so useful that it would be easier to tolerate him than to destroy him. He started with the infirmary. Myrna got everything she asked for. 2 neighboring houses were rebuilt. Yorick and Helga tore down the wall between them. The result was a long room with 3 tables. Horst forged brackets for the lamps. Pasha built shelves for the instruments. Marta scrubbed the floors until they were spotless. Myrna arranged the instruments. Scalpels, clamps, needles, bandages, herbs, ointments. Everything in its place, just as it should be. She stood in the middle of the infirmary and said nothing. Artem stood beside her. He asked what was wrong. Myrna replied that everything was just right. For the first time in her entire life, everything was just right. A clean room, clean instruments, assistants who never tire and never make mistakes due to fatigue. She said her mother had died because the temple wouldn't let a doctor in. And here there were 3 tables and a skeleton holding the lamp more steadily than any living assistant. She turned away. Artem saw her wipe her eyes with the back of her hand. He didn't say anything. Some things don't need words. Later, he built a temple for Soyan, a small one, out of logs that Helga had cut down. 1 room. An altar made of river stone, a round white stone on a stone pedestal. Soyan stood inside and cried, quietly, brightly, the kind of crying that comes from joy. Artem told her that her faith was right. She just hadn't had any proof. Now she did. Soyeon looked at him with tear-filled eyes and said that he was definitely the embodiment of the old mother. Artem replied that he was still a veterinarian. Soyeon laughed. The first laughter in that temple, a good sound to start with. Hannah organized a reconnaissance mission. Strel and Yugalok patrolled the outer perimeter, 2 rings. The inner one a kilometer from the walls, the outer one 3 kilometers away. Hannah herself went to the far exits. Once a week, she checked the roads, tracks, signs. She began marking the trees, simple notches that only she could read. A warning system. If anyone was heading toward Quiet Valley, Hannah would know a day in advance. Artem worked with his charges. The 12th month. A year since waking up in the temple. A year in a foreign body, in a foreign world, with foreign magic and foreign rules. Kieran's body had changed. He was no longer a skinny boy with ribs sticking out. A year of hard work. Proper food. Growth. Muscles. His arms had grown stronger. His shoulders had broadened. His voice had deepened. Not quite a man's yet, but no longer a child's. 16 years old. The dark energy in his chest had grown as well. His reserves had increased. Each ascent came more easily. The first Yorick had cost him 2 days of weakness. The last Iva had cost him half a day. He was growing stronger. The channels were expanding, like muscles from exercise, like lungs from running. He was growing. On the evening of the anniversary, Artem sat on a wall and looked out over Quiet Valley from above. 14 houses with intact roofs, 2 fields with green shoots, a blacksmith's shop with smoke rising from its chimney, an infirmary with clean windows, a small temple with a round stone on the altar, the wall all around, a moat filled with water, goats in a pen, chickens in the yard, children running and laughing, the women washing clothes by the well, dead workers hauling stones, chopping wood, and standing on the walls. And Leah, who sat next to Martha and braided her non-existent hair on her skull. She simply ran her fingers over the bone and muttered something, and Martha sat motionless and listened. Artem thought of the full 4 hours, piece by piece, tendon by tendon, bone by bone. He had put the full back together. The full had survived. Now he was putting something bigger back together. 26 people in a village at the edge of the world. A year of work, a year of care, a year of silence that could end at any moment. But for now, the silence held. As long as the roofs didn't leak, as long as the walls stood, as long as Leah smiled, as long as that was enough. The second year began with Evelyn Ashford. She arrived in a convoy of refugees, 30 people, half of them were children. They'd been walking from the south for 2 months. Evelyn was the only one among them who didn't look like a refugee. Her back was straight, her nails were clean. She spoke in a way that made people fall silent and listen. The daughter of the southern Margrave, an aristocrat to her very fingertips, even in the mud and rags. She entered the gates of Quiet Valley, and the first thing she did was inspect the walls, then the gates, then the moat. And she said the fortifications were useless. Hannah stood nearby, silently clenching her fists. Artem approached. Evelyn looked at him. A boy, 16 years old, a dirty shirt, hands covered in dirt. She asked if he was in charge here. Artem replied that he was. Evelyn said he smelled like a slaughterhouse. Artem replied that it was formalin. Evelyn didn't know what formalin was, but she realized it wasn't exactly a compliment. She stayed because she had nowhere else to go. Her ancestral estate had been swallowed up by the rift. Her paladin fiancé had died on the border. Her title was worthless now that the lands behind it were gone. She was smart, cold, sarcastic, and utterly alone. Artem gave her a room. Evelyn looked at Martha, who had brought a blanket. She turned pale. She clenched her teeth. She took the blanket. She said thank you. An aristocrat's politeness is stronger than fear. A week later, Evelyn began to work, not with her hands, but with her mind. She came to Artem with a sheet of paper covered in numbers, grain consumption, the number of mouths to feed, firewood reserves, water consumption. She calculated everything in 2 days, and she said that at the current rate of population growth, Tiki Dole wouldn't survive a second winter. There wouldn't be enough food. There wouldn't be enough firewood. There would be enough water, but just barely. Artem looked at the numbers and realized she was right. He was a veterinarian, not an economist. He thought about bodies, bones, and joints. She thought about grain, firewood, and people. They both needed each other. Evelyn began to make plans. A third field, expanding the livestock pen. Hannah brought back 2 more cows from her latest foray. Skinny, but alive. Artem examined them. Out of habit, a veterinarian to the core. One was healthy, the other had an inflamed hoof. He washed it, treated it, and applied a bandage. Myrna watched him work with the cow and said she now believed he was a veterinarian. Artem replied that this was his first normal patient in a year, alive and mooing. Myrna almost smiled. A woman arrived with Evelyn's wagon. A young woman, holding a dead baby in her arms. She wouldn't give him up. To anyone. She wouldn't let anyone touch him. She held him close to her chest and rocked back and forth. 2 months. She had been carrying the dead child for 2 months. People from the caravan said they tried to take him away. She screamed so loudly that they backed off. Artem approached her that evening. He sat down next to her. He didn't say anything. He just sat there. She rocked the baby. He sat there. An hour later, she looked at him. He said he could do something. Not bring it back, not revive it, not make the baby wake up and cry, but make sure it wasn't cold. She looked at him. She didn't understand. He asked her to let him have the baby for a few hours. She didn't let him. He didn't insist. He said he'd be here, when she was ready. She came at dawn. Silently, she handed him the bundle. Artem took it. He went into the workshop. 6 hours. He worked on the tiny body. He didn't lift it. He didn't unleash a dark wave. He simply mended it. Carefully, gently, as if with the most fragile foal. He straightened the twisted little fingers, smoothed out the skin, closed the eyes that wouldn't close. Then he wrapped the body in a new, clean cloth and laid it next to the stove for an hour to warm it up. When he returned the child to its mother, the body was warm, as if alive, as if it had just fallen asleep. He told her the child wouldn't wake up. It couldn't, but it wasn't cold anymore. She could bury him tomorrow, however she wanted. The woman held the warm child and said nothing. Then she pressed him to her chest, and for the first time in 2 months, her face relaxed. Not a smile, not joy, just peace. She sat with him by the fire all night. In the morning, she herself handed over the body for burial, calmly, quietly, without a cry. Soyan performed the rite, a small one, according to the old mother's traditions. The earth receives, the earth preserves, the earth lets go. The woman stayed in Quiet Valley. A month later, she was working at the children's home that Soyan had organized. She fed the children, she did their laundry, she put them to bed. One day, Myrna asked her why she had stayed. The woman replied that Artem was the only person who hadn't told her to go. Evelyn had heard this story. That evening, she went to see Artem. For the first time, without sarcasm, for the first time, without bitterness. She stood in the doorway of the workshop and looked at the table where he was working, and she said that there was a body in her wagon train. Artem looked at her. She said it was her fiancé, a paladin. He died on the southern border. She'd bought the body from the gravediggers. She'd been transporting it for 2 months in a barrel of salt at the bottom of her wagon. No one knew. She hadn't been able to ask before. She couldn't bring herself to do it, but now she's asking. Artem asked what exactly she wanted. Evelyn said she didn't know. She wanted him to come back to life. And at the same time, she didn't, because she knew it wouldn't be him. Artem nodded. He explained it to her, calmly, just as he'd explained to pet owners that their pet wouldn't come back the same. That an empty body is a new being. That it wouldn't remember her, wouldn't love her, wouldn't know how she laughs or what flowers she likes. But she'll be able to say goodbye, for real. Not to a cold coffin, to the body standing before her and looking at her, with an empty gaze, but standing there. Evelyn was silent for a long time, then she nodded. Artem had been working on the body for 2 days. The paladin was large, heavy, a warrior's muscles, strong bones, many wounds. 3 on the chest, 1 on the throat. Demons show no mercy. Artem fixed everything. He stitched up the wounds, set the joints, reinforced the neck with metal pins. He lifted him. The paladin stood up, tall, broad-shouldered, empty eyes. Evelyn stood before him. She looked at him. He looked at her, not recognizing her, not remembering. She raised her hand, touched his cheek. It was cold. She stood there like that for a minute. Then she withdrew her hand. She turned to Artem. She said his name was Derek, that he was a good blacksmith. He had strong hands. She asked him to leave him in Quiet Valley. Artem nodded. Evelyn went outside. Myrna found her behind the house. She was crying, just once, quietly, briefly. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her back, and never cried again. From that day on, Evelyn became a different person in Quiet Valley. Not a guest, not a refugee, one of their own. She took charge of all the diplomacy, negotiations with merchants whom Hannah found along the roads, letters that had to be written correctly and persuasively, planning for expansion. She thought 5 steps ahead, just as a Margrave's daughter should. In the 14th month, Irene Vaughn arrived. She didn't just arrive, she burst in, petite, red-headed, talking non-stop, with a bag of tools on her back that weighed more than she did. The daughter of a renowned master from the Central Kingdom, she had run away from her father, who wanted to marry her off to a guildmaster's son. She was 19, she looked 15, and she thought faster than everyone in Quiet Vale put together. She saw Yorick on the wall. She wasn't afraid. She walked over. She touched his shoulder joint. She twisted his arm. She watched how his elbow moved, and she said that the attachment was good, but if a hinge plate were added between the shoulder blade and the collarbone, the range of motion would increase by 1/3. Artem stood nearby and didn't know what to say. She was right. He looked at her hands, small, nimble, with calluses from tools. Not from a knife or a pestle, from a file, from a hammer, from fine-tip pliers. The hands of an engineer. He asked how she knew about hinge plates. Irene replied that she'd been designing mechanisms since she was 12. Mills, presses, locks, anything that moves, spins, and works. Her father let her design them, but not build them. Building was for boys. A girl could draw blueprints, but she wasn't supposed to work with her hands. Artem looked at her calluses. Irene caught his gaze. She smiled. She said she wasn't a very obedient daughter. She stayed that very day. She didn't even ask if she could. She just laid out her tools in the empty shed and started working. By evening, she had taken apart and reassembled the plow that Artem had cobbled together a year ago. It was now a quarter lighter and cut twice as deep into the ground. Artem watched this and realized he'd found something important. He knew how to repair bodies. Horst knew how to forge metal. Irene knew how to design. If he combined all 3 skills, the result would be greater than the sum of its parts. He started working with her the next day. He showed her his notes, cards detailing his charges, skeletal diagrams, blueprints for metal reinforcement. Irene flipped through them, her eyes growing wider and wider. She spoke without pause. If we place a steel strut here, the joint will withstand 3 times the load. If we replace the tendon here with a braided horsehair cable, flexibility will increase. If we add a counterweight to the forearm here, the strike will be stronger and the body will tire less. Artem listened. He took notes. He checked her points. She was right, in every case. She saw the body as a mechanism. He saw the body as an organism. Together, they saw more than they did individually. Irene began calling her trainees my boys and my girls. Jorik became the first subject of the upgrade. Irene and Horst worked together to make him new shoulder pads. Not just protection, but amplifiers. Steel plates built into the shoulder girdle, distributing the load from the arms to the entire torso. After the installation, Yorick lifted a rock he hadn't been able to budge before. Irene jumped for joy. Horst shook his head. Artem recorded the results. In the 15th month, Taki Dol took in another 20 refugees. The population exceeded 50 living people. There were now 18 people under his care. Artem revived the new ones as he found their bodies. Strel brought them from the forest, from ditches, from under rubble, from frozen ravines, refugees who had died on the roads, peasants killed by bandits, soldiers who never made it to the garrison. Artem examined every body, repaired them, revived them, gave each one a name, created a record for each one. Irene improved their design. Horst forged the parts. Myrna helped with the mana channels when they found bodies with the right potential. 2 more had their channels opened. Not as strong as Raven's. Weaker, but they worked. 3 skeleton mages in the village. 3 impossibilities. Every evening, Soyen would go around to her charges and sing to them. Leah would braid their non-existent hair and mend their clothes. The refugee children played alongside them. They've gotten used to it. They'd stopped being afraid. A little girl of about 5 approached Yorick and asked for a piggyback ride. Yorick looked at Artem. Artem nodded. Yorick carefully lifted the girl and sat her on his shoulder. She laughed. A dead peasant with hardened bones and steel shoulder pads was carrying a living child through the village, and the child was laughing. Myrna stood next to Artem and watched this, in silence. Then she said that if the church saw this scene, it would be worse for her than any heresy. Artem replied that it would be worse for the church that the child was happy next to a dead man. Myrna nodded, and she said that was exactly why the church was dangerous. In the 16th month, Artem found the trolls. Strel and Ugok returned from a long patrol and led him to a gorge 3 hours' walk to the east. 2 bodies. Mountain trolls, huge, each 3 times the size of a human. Skin gray as stone, arms like logs, heads small for such bodies. Killed. Wounds from blessed steel. The paladins found them and killed them. Standard procedure. Trolls are beasts, unholy creatures, not human. Artem stood over the bodies and thought. He had never worked with anatomy like this before. Their bones were 5 times thicker than a human's. Their muscles were as dense as wood. Their joints were completely different, hinge-like, not like those of humans. He couldn't lift them right away. He needed time to study, to understand, to make sense of it all. He spent 3 days with the trolls' bodies. He didn't eat. He barely slept. Myrna brought him water and bread. Irene sat nearby and drew diagrams based on his descriptions. He dictated. The shoulder joint, ball and socket type. Range of motion, 300 degrees. Impossible for a human, normal for a troll. Knee joint, double, 2 points of flexion. That's why they walk strangely. That's why they're stable. Skull, thick, no mana channels, none at all. Trolls aren't mages. They compensate for this with mass and durability. Spine, short, rigid, barely bends, but it can withstand a blow that would kill an elephant. After 3 days, he knew these trolls as well as he knew his own charges. Every bone, every joint, every muscle bundle. He mended them, set dislocations caused by blows, stitched up wounds from steel, reinforced weak spots. Irene designed the reinforcements. Horst forged non-stop for 3 days. Steel strips for the spine, plates for the ribs, spikes for the fists. Artem placed his palms on the gray skin and sent a wave through it. Dark, deep, powerful. So much energy surged from him that he fell to his knees. Myrna caught him. He sat on the ground and watched. The tutor opened its eyes. Yellow. Huge. Empty. It stood up. The ground shook. 3 meters tall. 400 kilograms. Steel plates on its ribs. Spikes on its fists. A creature Valgard had never seen before. Artem named him Thunder. He raised the second one the next day. He named him Storm. 2 titans. 2 walls of muscle, steel, and dark energy. They stood at the gates of Quiet Hollow, and the sun didn't reach the ground behind them. Hannah looked at them, then at Artem, and she said she felt more at ease now. In the 20th month, Artem found a dragon. Strel led him to a glacier 2 days' journey to the northeast. The body lay in the ice. Huge. Its wings folded along its body. A skull the size of a wagon. Bones white with age. This dragon had died long ago, maybe 100 years ago, maybe 200. The ice had preserved it as if in a sarcophagus. Artem stood before it and felt the darkness in his chest rumbling. Not from fear, it was the sheer scale of it. It was the largest body he had ever seen in his life, in either of his 2 lives. He couldn't lift it right away. He barely understood how this creature was built. Wings, not like a bird's. Different. Leathery membranes stretched over a bony frame. Like a bat's, but 1,000 times larger. 4 joints in each wing. The center of gravity shifted toward the chest. The pectoral muscles took up 1/3 of the body, all for the sake of flight. He returned to Tiki Dol. He gathered Irene and Horst. He laid out the blueprints. 3 months. He needed 3 months to figure out this body, and then more time for repairs and getting airborne. Irene looked at the blueprints, her eyes ablaze. She said that if he got the dragon airborne, she'd need a saddle. Not an ordinary one, a saddle for flight, with mounts that could withstand the wind and G-forces. Artem replied that the dragon came first, then the saddle. Irene replied that she would start designing it right away, so as not to waste any time. For 3 months, Artem walked to the glacier every other day. 2 days there, 1 day of work, 2 days back. On every trip, he studied a new part. The wings, the spine, the tail, the paws, the claws, the teeth, the rib cage, and the respiratory system. Dragons had double lungs, the primary ones for breathing and the secondary ones for something else. Maybe for fire. He wasn't sure. A dead dragon doesn't need fire, but the structure was interesting. Myrna went with him twice. She checked the mana channels. The dragon had them. Huge, thick, like rivers compared to the trickles in human skulls. The dragon was a magical creature. Mana flowed through every bone, every muscle, every centimeter of its wing. Magic and flesh were intertwined, inseparable. Artem wrote everything down, notebook after notebook. Irene redrew his notes into precise blueprints. Horst began to forge, long, flexible strips of steel for the wings, pins for the joints, plates for the rib cage. Everything was made to the measurements Artem had taken from the body. In the 23rd month, he began the repairs. Together with Irene and Horst, the three of them worked on the glacier. Thunder and Storm hauled the tools and materials. Their strength was needed to move the dragon's body parts. No single person could lift a wing on their own. The trolls managed, Artem repaired, bone by bone, joint by joint, the wing that had broken in the fall, the vertebrae that had shifted from the impact, the ribs that had cracked. He broke them apart and put them back together. Irene reinforced them with steel strips. Horst adjusted every part in place. 3 weeks, every day from dawn to dusk. Artem was losing weight. He grew tired. He collapsed. Myrna made him eat. Leah brought water. Soyen sang. Hannah stood guard. Evelyn counted the supplies and said they couldn't afford to use resources like that. Artem replied that they could. Because the dragon would change everything. A dragon isn't a weapon. A dragon is an opportunity. Aerial reconnaissance, cargo transport, speed, surveillance, and yes, defense. Because the demons are getting closer and closer. Over the past month, Strel and Ugolok had twice found tracks near the outer perimeter. 3-toed indentations in the ground, red eyes in the darkness. There were more of them. The rift was widening. When the repairs were finished, Artem stood before the dragon and realized this was the most difficult thing he'd ever done in his life. The body was enormous. Its mass was unimaginable. It required so much energy that he wasn't sure he'd survive. He told Myrna this. Myrna hung up the phone. She looked at him, and she said she'd be right there. If he fell, she'd pull him out. Artem placed both palms on the dragon's skull. He closed his eyes and let it go. All the dark energy, to the very bottom, to the last drop. A wave of such power surged from his chest that the earth trembled. The ice cracked. Rocks rained down from the gorge's walls. Myrna took a step back. Thunder and Storm froze. The energy flowed through his hands into the dragon's bones, down its spine, along its ribs, across its wings, down its tail, through every joint he had mended, through every plate Irene had inserted, through every pin that Horst had forged. The body filled up, like a vessel. Slowly, inevitable. Artem felt everything draining from him. Strength, warmth, consciousness. He held on, clenched his teeth, didn't let go of his hands. Just a little more, just a little bit more. One more wing, one more joint. The dragon opened its eyes. Huge, amber, empty, and beautiful. Artem fell. Myrna caught him. He lay on the ice and looked up. The dragon was raising its head. Slowly, like a newborn. Its neck straightened, vertebra by vertebra. Its wings stirred. Ice crumbled from its membranes. Its tail twitched. Its paws braced against the stone. The dragon stood up. For the first time in hundreds of years, on bony legs covered in new flesh, with wings reinforced with steel, with eyes that could see in the dark. Artem lay in Myrna's arms and looked at him, and he said quietly that his name was Ashes, because he had risen. Myrna held him and said nothing. There was something on her face that he had never seen before. Not quite a smile, not irony, not coldness, fear, and admiration. And a third thing she couldn't name. Ash's first flight took place a week later. The dragon learned like all empty bodies do, from scratch, step by step. On the first day, he stood. On the second, he walked. On the third, he spread his wings. On the fourth, he flapped them. On the fifth, he lifted 3 meters off the ground and crashed. On the sixth, 10 meters. On the seventh, he flew. Irene installed the saddle at dawn on the 7th day. Her work. Half a year of design. Leather straps, steel fasteners, a girth that runs under the dragon's ribcage and secures at 6 points, a backrest that holds the rider in place during turns and dives, a platform for a second passenger behind her. Irene fastened the last buckle, and her hands didn't tremble. She turned to Artem and said the saddle was ready. Artem looked at the saddle, then at Irene, then at the dragon. Pepel stood by the wall of Quiet Valley, his wings obscuring the sky. 20 meters in wingspan, a bony frame covered in flesh, steel stiffeners. His eyes were amber, empty, and as deep as wells. Artem climbed into the saddle. Irene helped tighten the straps. Her hands brushed against his back as she intently checked each fastening. She found a mistake. Not in the saddle, in his calculation of the wing joints. The fourth joint on the left had half a degree of play, imperceptible on the ground but dangerous in the air. She mentioned it quietly, blushing as if apologizing for knowing better. Artem looked at her. For the first time, he didn't see the apprentice girl running after him with a notebook. He saw an engineer, an equal, someone who sees what he's missed. He told her she was right, and that without her, this flight wouldn't have happened. Irene stood below, watching as the dragon spread its wings. Her saddle, her work, her 6 months. Pepel pushed off from the ground. The wind hit his face. The ground receded below. The trees grew small. The houses became dots. The people became ants. Artem held onto the ridge and looked down. Quiet Valley lay beneath him, spread out like the palm of his hand. Walls, houses, fields, the smithy, the temple, the infirmary, and people. Tiny figures who craned their necks and looked up. Next to him in the second seat sat Leah. He hadn't wanted to take her. She'd insisted. She was 12. She clung to his belt and looked down with an expression that made Artem understand. She wasn't afraid. She'd never been afraid. Not of Thing. Not the dead. Not heights. She was afraid of only one thing. That he would leave. Just as everyone had left her life before him. He placed his hand on hers. She squeezed his fingers. The ash was gaining altitude. The mountains unfolded below like folds of fabric. Rivers glistened like silver threads. The forests were green. And far, far to the south, Artem saw it. A black streak on the horizon. A rift. The line where the earth ended and darkness began. Even from here, from the height of the clouds, it was visible. Wide, jagged, creeping northward, like a wound on the body of the world. Artem looked at it and felt it. The dark energy in his chest responded, not to demons, to the earth itself, the dead earth beyond the rift. It was calling to him, like a body on an operating table calls to a surgeon, quietly, insistently, desperately. He thought of the full, then of quiet fate, then of all the bodies he had mended over the past 2 years. People, trolls, a dog, a dragon. He mended bodies, one earlier, patiently, carefully, with care. But down below lay a body he hadn't repaired yet. The biggest one. The sickest one. Mir. They returned at sunset. Pepel landed softly. Irene was inspecting the saddle for damage. Hannah demanded a report on what could be seen from the air. Myrna stood off to the side, smoking. Evelyn calculated the resources needed to maintain the dragon. Soyan sang something solemn. Leah wouldn't let go of his hand. Artem convened a council that evening. Everyone. Hannah, Myrna, Soyan, Evelyn, Irene, Tobias, Horst. Everyone who had built Quiet Valley alongside him. He told them he had seen the rift, that it was widening, that in another year it would reach the northern foothills, reach them, that there was nowhere left to flee. Beyond the mountains lay the sea. He said he knew how to seal it, not with a sword, not with prayer, not with an army. The rift is a wound, dead land, land from which life has departed. He knows how to bring life back to the dead. That's his job. He must reach the rift and do what he's always done, repair it. Evelyn asked at what cost. Artem replied that he didn't know. Myrna asked when. Artem replied that it would be in the spring, in 3 months, when the snow melts and the roads open up. Hannah asked who would go. Artem replied that everyone would go. The entire Quiet Valley would go, the living and the dead, not like an army, like a mobile hospital, one that heals the land along the way. Soyan quietly said that the old mother was smiling. Artem replied that he was still a veterinarian. 3 months of preparation. Hannah planned the route. Evelyn counted the supplies. Irene upgraded each of her charges. Horst forged away without stopping. Myrna prepared the mobile infirmary. Artem worked with his charges. 30 bodies, each one checked, each reinforced, each ready. 2 titans, 3 skeleton mages, a dragon, and 25 peasants, artisans, and guards who, over 2 years, had become something greater than the sum of their bones. They had become a family, the one Artem had pieced together bit by bit, like a foal, tendon by tendon, bone by bone, name by name. In the 26th month, Quiet Dole set out south. The march south took 2 months. The column moved slowly. 50 survivors, 30 charges, 2 titans, a dragon, a supply wagon train, a mobile infirmary. Iron rode in a wagon and tended to the charges as they went. Myrna walked alongside the mobile infirmary, treating those with sore feet or colds. Hannah led the scouting party. Evelyn was keeping track of the daily consumption of water and grain. Soyeon was singing. Leah sat on Grom's shoulder and looked ahead. Others were joining them along the way, refugees who were heading north and suddenly saw a column heading south. They would stop and watch. Skeletons in clean shirts, trolls with steel plates on their ribs, a dragon overhead, and a young boy walking ahead who smiled when the children pointed at the dragon. Some turned around and joined them. Not everyone, but some. By the end of the first month, the column had doubled in size. 100 survivors. Artem picked up new charges along the way. Bodies were everywhere. The war with the demons left them at every turn, along the roadsides, in the ditches, in burned-out villages. Artem would stop the column, inspect, repair, pick them up. Iron would bandage them. Horst would forge on a portable anvil. Myrna would check the supply lines, an assembly line. Gruesome, efficient, and caring all at once. Everybody was given a name. Everybody was given a shirt. Everybody was given a job. By the end of the 2nd month, there were 80 people in their care. Artem wasn't leading an army, he was running a hospital, a city on the march, a family that grew with each passing day. At the border of the devastated lands, they encountered the royal army, or rather, what remained of it. 3,000 soldiers, exhausted, starving, wounded. The regimental commander looked at Artem's column and was at a loss for words. Skeletons, trolls, a dragon, and a teenager at the head of it all. The commander reached for his sword. Then he saw a skeleton grandmother in a bonnet carrying a pot of hot soup to a wounded soldier. He lowered his hand. Myrna set up the infirmary in an hour. 3 tables, clean instruments, skeleton assistants who never grew tired of holding the wounded. She operated for 2 days straight without a break. Artem worked beside her. He didn't treat the living. He repaired the dead. Soldiers who died on Myrna's table were moved to his. Not all of them. Only those whose bodies could be repaired. He asked the commander for permission. The commander was silent for a long time. Then he said that the dead didn't care, and he needed fighters. Artem replied that they wouldn't be fighters. They would be guards. They would protect, not to attack. The commander looked at Yorek, who was standing nearby, an old peasant with hardened bones and steel shoulder guards, a scythe in his hands, a clean shirt, empty eyes, and a bonnet that Leah had, for some reason, put on him as well. The commander said he didn't care, as long as it worked. By the 3rd month of the march, they reached the rift. Artem stood at the edge and looked out. Black earth, dead, cracked. Trees stood like skeletons, black, bare, without bark. Grass didn't grow, water didn't flow. There was no life. There was nothing. Only emptiness and the smell of iron and acid. And far ahead, in the gap in the horizon, something stood. A portal, a hole in the world, from which demons were crawling out. Artem could feel them. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, beyond the portal, waiting, hungry, striving to break through. And he felt the ground, the dead ground beneath his feet. It was like a body, like a huge body on an operating table, with fractures and wounds and lacerations. He knew what to do. He'd been doing this his whole life. The demons struck at dawn, a wave of flesh and fangs and claws. They advanced like a wall, red eyes, 3 claws, bodies of flesh and hunger, not dead, alive, living beasts that wanted to eat. A wall of his charges met them, 80 bodies, 2 titans, 3 mages, Yorick in the front row with a scythe, Helga beside him with an axe, Reno with a spear, Derek with a hammer. the skeleton guards he'd raised along the road, all in clean shirts, all with names, all ready. Artem stood in the rear, in the infirmary. As always, not on the front lines, not with a sword, with his tools. Myrna was nearby, Irene was nearby. 2 women and 1 veterinarian. The repair line, the battle was terrible. Demons were breaking through the ranks of the charges, tearing off arms, ripping off heads, breaking bones. The charges were falling. Artem was raising them up again, setting jaws. He reset their arms. He put ribs back in place. He restarted bodies that had stopped moving, one after another, without stopping. Irene repaired the mechanics, steel plates, hinges, fasteners. Myrna treated the living who'd been grazed by shrapnel or stray blows. An assembly line, horrifying and beautiful. Kale Morven arrived in the thick of the battle, alone, in white armor, with a sword. He cut his way through the demon's flank and stood next to Artem on the wall of carts. Artem looked at him. Kale looked at Artem, and said that he still believed Artem was wrong. But these people were not wrong to have come to him. And he ordered him to take command. Artem didn't argue. He ordered Kale to hold the right flank. Kale nodded and left. The paladin of the Order of the White Flame fought shoulder to shoulder with the skeletons. His blessed steel hacked at the demons. The sides of his charges hacked nearby, the living and the dead. Together, the battle lasted until noon, wave after wave. His charges fell and rose, fell and rose. Artem healed them again and again. His hands trembled with exhaustion. His energy was draining. Kiran's body grew weaker with every revival. Then came the final wave, the biggest one. The creature at the head was the size of a house. 6 legs, 4 eyes, armor of black bone. It plowed through the ranks of his charges like a plow through the earth, scattering them, shattering them, crushing them. Thunder and storm rushed at it, trolls against a demon, a wall of muscle and steel against a wall of armor and fury. Thunder struck first. His fist, studded with steel spikes, slammed into the armor. A crack spread from the impact, but the creature struck back. Thunder was sent flying. His left arm was torn off. His ribs were crushed. Artem saw this and realized it wouldn't be enough. His men were exhausted. The titans were damaged. The surviving soldiers could barely stand. Kale was wounded in the shoulder and fighting with one hand. It wouldn't be enough. He looked at Pepel. The dragon stood behind the battle line and waited. Empty amber eyes gazed at Artem, waiting for a command, waiting for a decision. Artem closed his eyes. He thought. The dragon, thunder, a storm, the 3 fallen men whose bodies lay nearby. If he took them apart and put them back together, not separately, together, the titan's bones for mass, the dragon's wings for maneuverability, Iren's steel plates for strength, mana channels for power. A single creature, assembled from parts, just as he'd assembled the full, piece by piece, only on a different scale. He opened his eyes. He told Irene he needed all the steel reserves. He told Myrna he needed her by his side, for the channels. He told Lai, who stood behind the cart with a frightened yet determined expression, that everything would be all right. And he began to work. He worked harder than he ever had in his life. His hands moved of their own accord. 20 years of experience, thousands of operations, hundreds of bodies, all for this moment. He took Thunder's bones and set them into Ash's frame. He took Storm's muscles and built up the wings. Irene embedded the steel. Myrna channeled the mana. He assembled it, bone by bone, joint by joint, steel plate by plate. The creature rose from the ground like a house being built. Foundation, walls, roof, wings, claws, eyes. Artem placed his palms on the creature's chest and gave everything. Not just a part, everything. Every drop of dark energy, every spark of life that remained in his scrawny teenage body. He felt the world fade away, the sounds fade, the light dim. And at the very last moment before falling, he heard Myrna scream his name. The creature rose. 5 meters tall on 4 legs, dragon's wings, the mass of titans, an engineer's steel, the mana of 3 skeleton mages channeled through its veins. It wasn't beautiful, it was necessary. It turned toward the demon and walked. It didn't run, it walked, calmly, like a surgeon walking toward the operating table. The demon lunged at it. The creature met it, not with a blow, with a shield, a wall of mana, dense, blue, bright. The demon crashed into it and stopped. For the first time in the entire battle, something had stopped it completely. The creature wrapped its 4 paws around the demon, pinned it to the ground, held it, without killing it, just holding it. Kale saw his chance. He raised his sword. The blessed steel flashed white. He struck, once. Into the crack that Grom had made, the armor burst, the demon twitched, froze, and began to crumble, like sand, like ash, like everything that fades away. The battle was over. Artem lay on the ground, unable to move. Myrna held his head in her lap and poured water onto his lips. Leah sat nearby, crying quietly. He told her not to cry. He was just tired, like after a shift, a long shift. Myrna told him he was an idiot. He replied that she was right. She leaned down and pressed her forehead against his, for a second. Then she straightened up and ordered them to carry him to the infirmary. For 3 days, Artem lay there, completely drained. Myrna never left his side. Leah slept on the floor beside him. Ugolka lay by the door. On the 4th day, he got up. He stepped out of the tent, and he saw the rift. Close by, 100 paces away, a black line in the ground, a strip of death. He walked toward it, alone. Myrna wanted to stop him. Hannah wanted to stop him. Kale wanted to stop him. He shook his head. This was his job, his alone. He reached the edge. He stood at the boundary between the living and the dead. He dropped to his knees. He placed his palms on the black, cracked earth, and he closed his eyes. Kieran's body, Kieran's blood, the blood of the old mother's last priestess, the blood that had held the seal of the rift for 15 years. He could feel it now. Not the necromancer's dark energy, something else, deeper, older, a connection to the earth, to the soil, to the roots and stones and water. Kieran's mother had prayed before she died. She had asked for someone to be sent who could fix what could not be fixed. The world heard her. The world found a veterinarian who had fallen asleep at the wheel after spending 4 hours piecing together someone else's foal. The world tested whether he would save another's body at the cost of his own comfort. Artem saved it. The world accepted him. Now he knelt on the barren earth, and he did what he had done his whole life. He healed, not with a dark wave, not with necromancy, with something else, with what was in Kieran's blood, with what was in the old mother's faith, that which another doctor from another world had brought into this world 200 years ago. The knowledge that death is not a curse, it is a biological process, and it is reversible. The earth beneath his palms trembled, the blackness turned gray, the gray turned brownish, the brownish turned brown, the brown turned dark, alive, moist. A sprout emerged from the crack, green, slender, a single one. Artem opened his eyes. A single sprout, on the entire fault, a drop in the ocean, but a sprout, alive, green, on ground that had been dead a minute ago. He turned his head. Everyone was standing and watching. The living and the dead, shoulder to shoulder. Myrna with her pipe, Hannah with her knife, Soyon with her hands clasped, Evelyn standing tall, Irene with her notebook, Leah with Ugolak, Kale with his sword in its sheath, Yorick, Martha, Pasha, Grill, Strel. Everyone he had gathered, everyone he had mended, everyone he had raised, everyone he had found. Artem stood up. He looked at the rift, at the hundreds of kilometers of dead land ahead, at the portal on the horizon, at everything that still lay ahead. Then he looked at the sprout. Green, alive, real. And he said aloud, as quietly as he had back then in the forest by the dead dog, "Well then, guys, let's see what we've got here." Leah smiled. Ugolka wagged her tail. Marta adjusted her bonnet. And Tiki Dole stepped forward, into the dead land, to bring it back to life. Step by step, sprout by sprout, name by name, just as Artem had always done it. Patiently, carefully, with care. Because that was his job. It was just that the patient had grown a little bigger.